dives through cartoon history, where the roads wind through nostalgia, the skies shimmer with reruns, and the passengers. Well, tonight you're riding with Johnny Bravo. This isn't just a recap. This is a full tank of lore, a cassette tape humming in the dashboard, and a muscle-bound himbo asleep in the backseat. Because somewhere between flexing in the mirror and being rejected by literally every woman he's ever met, Johnny Bravo became a legend. You know him. Slick hair, sunglasses, skin-tight black t-shirt stretched across an ego the size of Texas. To most, he's a punchline, a walking parody of Elvis Presley and every gym rat who thinks calling a woman hot mama is a personality trait. But tonight, we're pulling over. We're looking under the hood. Who was Johnny Bravo, really? Where did he come from? Why did a student film about a cartoon jerk with nice hair become one of Cartoon Network's most quietly subversive shows? And how did a series about rejection, ego, and eternal adolescence sneak its way into pop culture's subconscious only to be misunderstood, memed, and, eventually, forgotten? This deep dive is for the cartoon obsessives. For the ones who remember the What a Cartoon showcase. The ones who sat cross-legged on carpet floors in the late 90s, watching Johnny get drop-kicked into fountains of humiliation and thinking, this is oddly sad for a comedy show. Over the next 3 hours, we'll be unraveling the curious case of Johnny Bravo, chapter by chapter, season by season, hair product by hair product. We'll explore how Van Partible's student thesis turned into a Hanna-Barbera swan song, why season 1 was too clever for its own good, how network meddling gave Johnny a lobotomy, the strange brilliance behind his dumbest moments, and what Johnny's tragic, lovable himbo energy says about fame, failure, and masculinity in cartoons. So whether you're here to study, to sleep, or to simply disappear into a time capsule of muscle, mamas, and mayhem, settle in. Close your eyes, or stare out the window of your imagination. The neon signs are glowing. The road ahead is rerun colored, and the air smells faintly of Aquanet. This is Lore FM, and tonight's transmission. 3 hours of pure, pompadoured cartoon chaos. Welcome to the legend of Johnny Bravo. So, let's go back, way back. Before the shades, the flex, the hey there, pretty mama. Before Johnny Bravo was meme royalty or nostalgic wallpaper on Gen Z's phones, he was a quiet storm brewing in the very last gasp of Hanna-Barbera's classic era. You know Hanna-Barbera. You might not remember the names William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, but you know the empire. This was the studio that gave us Scooby-Doo, the Flintstones, Yogi Bear, the Jetsons, Huckleberry Hound, and pretty much every cartoon that felt like it came free with a bowl of cereal. In the 60s and 70s, they were the house of animation. But by the early 90s, the crown was slipping. Cartoons were changing. Kids were changing. And most of all, the networks were changing. Cable had arrived. And with it, a new player, Cartoon Network. Cartoon Network didn't just want to re-air old classics. They wanted new blood. Something wild, offbeat, original. And Hanna-Barbera, aging titan that it was desperately trying to prove it could still be cool. Johnny Bravo would end up being one of its weirdest Hail Marys. But first, let's set the scene. The early 90s weren't exactly friendly to hand-drawn animation. Disney was crushing theaters with their Renaissance era, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin. On TV, meanwhile, cartoons were either sugar-coated toy commercials or edgy, gross-out experiments. Hanna-Barbera had survived for decades with recycled walk cycles, laugh tracks, and simple designs. But it wasn't enough anymore. Audiences were getting savvier. The kids were growing up weird. Enter Fred Seibert. If Hanna-Barbera was the old king, Fred Seibert was the rogue prince sent in to clean house. Seibert had just become president of Hanna-Barbera in 1992, and he brought with him a radical idea. Instead of creating shows from top-down corporate committees, why not go straight to the creators? Let them make shorts, test pilots, tiny bite-sized pieces of new IP. If one worked, boom, give it a show. If not, no harm, no foul. This would become the What a Cartoon show, which later became known as World Premiere Tunes. The idea was simple. Let animators run wild. And among those wild cards, a guy named Van Partible, a college student with a ponytail and a VHS tape called Mesa Blues. Van Partible wasn't some big-name animator. He was just a guy who liked Elvis, liked cartoons, and made a student film for his senior thesis. Mesa Blues was a short, hand-drawn comedy about a narcissistic guy with a pompadour who couldn't take a hint when women rejected him. Sound familiar? When he pitched it to Hanna-Barbera, they loved it. It was crude, raw, and fresh. They retooled it into a short called Johnny Bravo, and in 1995, it aired on the What a Cartoon showcase alongside other soon-to-be legends like Dexter's Laboratory, Cal, and Chicken in the Powerpuff Girls. What made Johnny Bravo stand out was how sharply it parodied a certain kind of American male archetype. The Jim Bro, the Elvis wannabe, the 1950s cool guy frozen in amber. He strutted, he posed, he flexed, he failed over and over. But the twist, he was completely unaware of his own ridiculousness, and that made him kind of lovable. Here's the thing about the first Johnny Bravo short, it wasn't just slapstick. It was satire. Like, real satire. It mocked toxic masculinity before that phrase was a thing. It made fun of pickup culture, machismo, and male entitlement, all without getting preachy. And it did this with snappy writing, quick visual gags, and a protagonist who was all ego and no clue. This wasn't your average cartoon. It was almost too clever for its own good. So of course, it got greenlit for a series. In 1997, Johnny Bravo officially premiered as a full-fledged show. And for its first season, it had something very rare in kids' TV, a consistent, confident tone, slick visuals, retro vibes, meta humor, a lead character who was simultaneously the joke and the heart. Season 1 was a visual love letter to classic mid-century animation. Think Koopa. Think the Jetsons meets Elvis Presley in an LA diner at midnight. Everything popped with bold outlines and pastel palettes. It didn't look like anything else on TV, and that was the point. Hanna-Barbera's last big swing. Here's the irony. Even though Johnny Bravo felt like a product of Cartoon Network's edgy new era, it was actually one of the last shows fully produced under the Hanna-Barbera name. This was the studio's final flex, their last true experiment before being absorbed and renamed as Warner Brothers Animation. And yet, it wasn't the farewell hit they hoped for. While Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls took off like rockets, Johnny Bravo hovered somewhere between cult favorite and commercial enigma. Maybe it was too smart, maybe too old-fashioned, or maybe, just maybe, it was ahead of its time. But behind the scenes, changes were already coming. The studio wasn't happy with the show's tone. Johnny was too sarcastic, too adult. So when season 1 wrapped, they quietly shuffled the deck. The original team was out. New writers were brought in. And the Johnny Bravo you'd see in season 2. Very different guy. But we'll get to that. Before we drive on, let's take a breath. Chapter 1 is our pit stop into the past, a look at how a dying animation giant, a scrappy film student, and a muscle-brained Elvis clone collided at just the right moment. Johnny Bravo didn't come out of nowhere. He came from the ruins of an empire, the chaos of a studio trying to stay relevant, and the ambition of creators who just wanted to do something weird and cool. He wasn't just the guy who got rejected by women every episode. He was a relic of cartoon history, with abs. And that's where our story begins. Let's rewind a bit more, not to the golden age of Hanna-Barbera, but to a college campus in the early 1990s, where a Filipino-American animation student named Efrem Giovanni Bravo Partible, better known as Van Partible, was about to change Cartoon Network forever. He didn't know it yet. Honestly, no one did. Because the thing that would eventually become Johnny Bravo started as a final project for a class. Not a studio pitch. Not a secret industry insider job. Just one ambitious college kid with a Sharpie, a dream, and an obsession with Elvis Presley. Van Partible was attending Loyola Marymount University. It was senior year, and that meant the pressure was on to deliver a memorable thesis film. Most students played it safe. Abstract shapes, quiet artsy reflections, maybe some rotoscoping if they were feeling bold. But Van, he wanted to make people laugh. And he had a character in mind, one that had been living in his sketchbooks for years. He wasn't called Johnny Bravo yet. Back then, he was just a nameless, absurd, pompadour dude in tight jeans who thought he was God's gift to women. The project would become Mesa Blues, A short cartoon about a cocky guy with a deep voice and an Elvis fixation, stumbling through a series of failed pickup attempts, each one more humiliating than the last. It was crude. It was short. But it was funny. And it had a very specific energy. Equal parts retro and ridiculous, self-aware and slapstick, classic in aesthetic but completely modern in tone. Let's be clear, Mesa Blues was not a finished product. It was rough around the edges. It didn't have the polished style we'd later see in Johnny Bravo. But it had that spark, that weight. This could actually be a show magic. After graduation, Van showed the short to contacts he had made during internships. Word started to spread. Eventually, a copy of the tape landed on the desk of a young executive at Hanna-Barbera who was scouting for fresh ideas as part of Fred Siebert's new initiative. And they loved it. Not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't. It was bold, character-driven, loud in all the right ways. And the lead, though clearly a walking disaster, was charming in his cluelessness. In a sea of safe, bland pitches, Mesa Blues felt like a breath of fresh pomade-scented air. Now let's talk about one of the real game changers, the voice. When Hanna-Barbera greenlit the idea for a What a Cartoon, sure, they knew they needed someone special to bring this ego-fueled Elvis clone to life. Enter Jeff Bennett. A veteran voice actor with insane vocal range, Bennett nailed the character in one take. He blended that classic Elvis drawl with a kind of stilted bravado, like a guy who watched too many action movies and now believes he is the movie. It wasn't just a voice. It was a personality. Every hey baby, every over-the-top grunt, every tragic flirtation with a woman who wanted nothing to do with him, Jeff Bennett delivered it with gold-plated sincerity. And just like that, Johnny Bravo was born. With Van Partible leading the concept and art direction, the team began reshaping the raw Mesa Blues concept into something more structured, more stylized, and network-ready. Gone was the grittiness of a student film. In its place, bold lines, minimalist backgrounds, a color palette that screamed mid-century Americana. Johnny himself became more exaggerated, broader shoulders, tighter jeans, taller hair. He was a caricature of American masculinity taken to cartoon extremes. He flexed with no muscle function. He spoke like Elvis with a concussion. He moved like a Looney Tune trapped in a 1950s diner. And it worked. The short debuted in 1995 on world premiere Tunes, alongside pilot episodes from geniuses like Andy Tartakovsky and Craig McCracken. Johnny Bravo held his own. Kids laughed. Teens laughed harder. Adults, well, they weren't entirely sure what they were watching. But it was funny. And it was different. At the time, Cartoon Network was still young. It had just launched in 1992 and was relying heavily on reruns from the Turner Broadcasting Library, meaning old Hanna-Barbera classics were on heavy rotation. But Fred Siebert's What a Cartoon initiative was something bold. It was an open casting call for the future of animation. Instead of relying on established IP, the network was investing in creator-driven shorts. The logic: if something clicked, they could give it a full series. If not, they still had a library of quirky one-offs that gave the network a signature identity. Johnny Bravo was one of the few that really stood out. It had a strong visual identity, a clear comedic hook, and a main character who, despite being utterly insufferable, had heart. Or maybe it was just the sunglasses. Hard to tell. Either way, when the network was deciding which pilots to expand into series, Johnny Bravo made the cut. Even though the pilot had landed well, Van Partible's journey was just beginning. Getting his show on air meant compromise. You couldn't just make the same 6-minute short over and over. You had to build a world. So the team got to work fleshing things out. Johnny's mom, Bunny Bravo, was introduced as the doting, eccentric anchor in his life. Susie, the girl next door who was infinitely smarter than Johnny, became a frequent foil. Carl, Johnny's dweeby best friend, added contrast and chaos. The writers leaned harder into parody, pop culture spoofs, TV tropes, action cliches, and absurd situations. Johnny Bravo would go from hitting on lifeguards to battling gorillas to accidentally time traveling, all in the same episode. The tone was smart dumb, highbrow wrapped in lowbrow clothing. And for season 1, it worked brilliantly. But even then, trouble was brewing. Network execs were watching closely. Some felt the humor was too adult. Some didn't get the satire. And others just thought, what if Johnny was dumber? Wouldn't that be funnier? You can probably guess where this is going. Let's pause here for a second. What Van Partible did, taking a school project and turning it into a full-blown series, is nearly unheard of in animation. He wasn't an industry insider. He wasn't riding coattails. He was just a guy who loved cartoons and had the audacity to make something wild, weird, and new. Johnny Bravo would go on to become one of Cartoon Network's signature shows of the late 90s. Even if later seasons veered into broader comedy and goofier territory, the DNA of Van Partible's original vision stayed embedded in Johnny's character. The absurd overconfidence, the relentless failures, the bizarre blend of satire and sincerity. It's easy to forget that all of it, every flex, every rejection, every cry of woe, mama, started with a student film. But that's cartoon history. Messy, unpredictable, and sometimes glorious. Before Johnny was flexing in reruns or slipping into your subconscious like a pickup line that never worked, he was just another face in the crowd. One of many in a cartoon showcase designed to disrupt the system. We're talking about the What a Cartoon show, a chaotic, colorful experiment that became a golden ticket for a new generation of animation. And Johnny Bravo, he was one of its biggest stars. Even if he didn't know it, what was What a Cartoon? Anyway, let's paint the picture. The early 90s were the dark ages for original TV animation. Studios played it safe. Toy-based cartoons dominated. Originality wasn't the priority, synergy was. Then came Fred Siebert, newly minted president of Hanna-Barbera. He had one radical idea: let creators be creators. Instead of hiring teams to build one show over 3 years, why not fund dozens of pilots and see what sticks? Each short would be creator-driven, 6 to 7 minutes long, a standalone proof of concept. Think of it like Saturday morning Shark Tank, but for cartoon weirdos. The logic was brilliant. Give animators a shot at directing and producing their own work. Give the audience variety, and give Cartoon Network an identity. It worked. In March of 1995, Johnny Bravo aired as one of the first What a Cartoon shorts, and something about it clicked. The moment that pompadour hit the screen, paired with Jeff Bennett's hilariously delusional voice, it was clear that Johnny wasn't just another forgettable goofball. He was a type, a trope taken to absurdist levels. He was the cool guy except stripped of self-awareness. He wasn't the hero. He wasn't even the villain. He was the guy who thought he was the hero, and that made everything funnier. That first short, simply titled Johnny Bravo, was lean and fast. Johnny tried to pick up a woman at the beach. He got drop-kicked. He flexed, posed, got drop-kicked again. It was like Looney Tunes for the 90s, but filtered through muscle, misfires, and a barely functioning frontal lobe. The animation, bold and boxy. The writing, quick, absurd, and punchy. The tone, somewhere between parody and affectionate roast. And audiences loved it. Not just kids, teens and college students were tuning in, too. Johnny Bravo had cross-generational appeal, and that was rare. So what made Johnny Bravo stand out from the dozen other shorts premiering around him? A few things. 1. The character was instantly recognizable. You didn't need a backstory. You didn't need lore. One look, one line, and you got Johnny. 2. It was timeless and timely. By riffing on the outdated macho guy, it felt retro and current at the same time. It spoofed the past while tapping into modern comedy. 3. The style was iconic. Johnny's sunglasses, the deep red background, the minimalist environments, it all popped. Clean, punchy, and different from the gross-out trend that was taking over Nickelodeon. 4. It was quotable. Hey there, pretty mama. Man, I look good. These weren't just lines, they were memes before memes. When Cartoon Network aired the original short, the response was immediate. Kids sent letters. College students started recording episodes on VHS. Animation forums and underground zines buzzed with talk of this absurd blonde egomaniac with the jaw of a superhero and the IQ of a houseplant. And the network noticed. Behind the scenes, the execs circled Johnny Bravo like vultures around a protein shake. The short was greenlit for 2 more mini-episodes under the What a Cartoon banner. Jungle Boy and Mr. Monkey Man. Johnny Bravo and the Amazon Women, which pushed the boundaries of parody. By the end of 1995, it was clear. Johnny wasn't just a fluke. He had the makings of a full series. In 1996, Van Partible was given the go-ahead to turn Johnny into a full-length, 13-episode season. This wasn't a pilot. This wasn't another short. This was the big leagues. And to sweeten the deal, the show was kept creator-driven. Van had major say over the tone, animation style, and narrative direction. That might sound obvious today, but back then, it was revolutionary. Studios rarely gave this much control to a fresh out-of-college creator. But Van had something most didn't, a fully formed world in his head. He knew how Johnny walked, talked, failed, and flopped. He knew this wasn't just a show, it was a statement. A comedy that poked fun at old-fashioned masculinity and held up a mirror to the clueless man-child archetype, all wrapped in 11-minute bursts of visual gags and catchphrases. This show's DNA was locked in. Johnny equals overly confident disaster magnet. The world equals endlessly unimpressed. The humor equals layered, smart, fast, and very weird. Once the series was greenlit, the team expanded the universe. We got Bunny Bravo, Johnny's sweet, clueless mom who supported him unconditionally. Little Susie, the precocious neighbor girl who always outsmarted Johnny. Carl, the nerdy, unlucky best friend with zero chill. And a rotation of one-off characters, karate masters, aliens, movie parodies, bizarre guest stars. Even Donny Osmond showed up. The writers leaned into surreal humor. Episodes became less about real-world logic and more about dream logic. Johnny could fall into a movie set, get cast as a superhero, get chased by werewolves, and still end the episode flexing like nothing happened. And the animation team, they doubled down on stylization. Johnny Bravo didn't just have jokes. It had vibe. It was a cartoon you could recognize by silhouette alone. Clean lines, hot pinks and reds, chunky animation. It was equal parts comic strip and pulp art. What most people don't realize is how influential this era of Johnny Bravo was. It inspired animators who would go on to shape the future of the medium. Writers and storyboard artists from the show later worked on SpongeBob SquarePants, Samurai Jack, Fairly Odd Parents, Adventure Time. It wasn't just a goofy show. It was a breeding ground for talent. And that talent flourished in the freedom Van Partible allowed. He wanted writers to be weird. He wanted animators to push the style. He wanted Johnny to live in a world where anything could happen as long as it was funny. By the end of its first season, Johnny Bravo had proven itself. It wasn't the most popular show on Cartoon Network, not by a long shot. But it had a loyal following. And more importantly, it had identity. The network had big plans. But behind the scenes, things were shifting. Some executives still weren't sold on the show's adult edge. Van Partible was dealing with creative clashes, and the next season would take Johnny in a, let's say, goofier direction. We'll talk about that in the next part. But for now, let's appreciate what this era was. A bold, strange, creator-first burst of cartoon brilliance that helped shape an entire generation of animators and gave us one of the most oddly iconic leads in animation history. He may not have known what he was doing, but somehow, it worked. Let's take a step back and ask a question you might not have considered when watching Johnny Bravo as a kid. Who is Johnny supposed to be? Not what is he. We know that part. He's a muscle-bound, sunglass-wearing, brain-cell-deficient pickup artist who gets rejected so often it's practically his full-time job. But who is Johnny? Really? Because beneath the slapstick and the squats, Johnny Bravo is one thing above all else. A parody of 1950s masculinity filtered through the neon haze of 1990s irony. And that, my friend, is what makes him so fascinating. To understand Johnny, you have to understand the archetype he's skewering. The 1950s American man, in TV, in film, in pop culture, was strong, stoic, confident, the head of the household, always in control, often deeply, hilariously clueless about the inner lives of women. He was a product of post-war stability, Cold War anxiety, and a booming consumer culture that fed men a simple narrative. Be big, be tough, provide, and never show weakness. Think James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. Think Marlon Brando in The Wild One. Think Elvis in literally anything. And then ask yourself, doesn't that sound exactly like Johnny Bravo? Except, dumber. Johnny's biggest influence, and Van Partible has confirmed this, was Elvis Presley. Elvis was the perfect blueprint. Charming, beautiful, absurdly self-confident, and steeped in a very specific kind of masculine performance. The hips, the hair, the voice, everything about Elvis was designed to project power and desire. But by the 90s, that Elvis energy had aged. It was kitsch. It was camp. It was outdated in the most delicious way. So Van Partible took that blueprint and ran it through a parody filter. What if Elvis wasn't cool? What if Elvis was a gym rat with no charisma? What if he said all the right lines but had zero emotional intelligence? Voila, Johnny Bravo. He didn't just look like a 1950s icon. He behaved like one, only stripped of nuance, awareness, or charm. He was a time capsule that didn't know the time had passed. Here's where things get really smart and really sneaky. Because Johnny Bravo, for all its goofy visuals and endless rejections, wasn't just making fun of one guy. It was skewering an entire era of cultural masculinity. Johnny was a walking reminder of how dumb the alpha male trope could be. He interrupted women. He flexed in mirrors. He hit on literally anything that moved. And he failed. Constantly. Not just because he was creepy, but because his worldview was built on a script that never worked. That was the brilliance of the show. Every episode was a reset. Johnny never learned. He never changed. But the audience did. Kids watched him and laughed at how ridiculous he was. Adults watched him and winced because they'd met guys like that. Or been guys like that. It was satire disguised as slapstick. Social commentary covered in protein powder. Rejection as a running gag. If Johnny Bravo had a thesis statement, it would be this. Confidence without self-awareness is a one-way ticket to failure. Johnny fails in every episode. But it's not the failure that defines him, it's the repetition of it. He never gets it. He's trapped in a loop of bad lines and worse timing. And this, again, is where the parody lands. Because the 1950s man was all about certainty. About walking into a room and knowing you'd get the job, the girl, the respect, the everything. Johnny walks into every situation like that, and then gets suplexed by reality. Here's the twist. Even though Johnny is a parody of toxic masculinity, he's also kind of lovable. Why? Because he's harmless. He's not mean. He's not manipulative. He's just coolest. He thinks he's the star of a romantic movie. He doesn't realize he's in a tragicomedy. This gives him just enough humanity to stay likable, even when he's being obnoxious. He's not a predator. He's a cartoon ghost of a masculine ideal that never existed. And ironically, that's why he endured. He wasn't just funny. He was familiar. A funhouse mirror version of someone you know. Maybe your uncle. Maybe your gym teacher. Maybe your inner monologue after 3 Red Bulls and a breakup. Take a look at the world Johnny Bravo lives in. It's not just absurd. It's engineered to highlight his flaws. Every woman is smarter than him. Every child is more emotionally grounded. Even the villains often have more dignity. Johnny exists in a universe that was made to resist him. It's like the Truman Show, but if Truman was the problem. A sandbox where the outdated man is left to flail in a future he doesn't understand. It's easy to forget that Johnny Bravo was never meant to be a hero. He was a walking setup, a punchline in motion, a guy stuck in his own delusion. That was the joke. And for season 1, especially under Van Partible's vision, that joke had weight. Because as loud and silly as the show could be, it was also subtle in how it poke fun at the past. It made fun of the outdated courtship rituals, the male ego, the fantasy of control in a world that doesn't need you to be the center. And it did it all with sound effects, pratfalls, and Elvis impressions. Before Johnny Bravo, male leads in cartoons were often morally righteous, ineffectual nerds, wisecracking teenagers, or anthropomorphic animals. Johnny wasn't any of those. He was bold, confident, physical, but also deeply, hilariously wrong. He walked into every scene like a king, and left like a doormat. He redefined what a male cartoon lead could be. Not heroic, not smart, not even successful, just ridiculously himself. That's rare, and oddly radical. Whoa, mama, the sound of satire. Even Johnny's catchphrases are part of the act. Man, I look good. Hey there, pretty mama. Do the monkey with me. These aren't cool lines. They're spoofs of cool lines. They sound like something your dad would say trying to flirt ironically at a wedding. Which is exactly the point. Johnny is stuck in a time loop of failed coolness. And he keeps pressing play. Because he doesn't know how else to exist. To this day, Johnny Bravo remains one of the most misunderstood icons in cartoon history. Some people see him as just a joke. Others see him as problematic. And some see him as weirdly relatable. But if you really zoom out, he's a perfectly preserved parody. A relic that reminds us what masculinity used to look like and how far we've come. He's the last guy on the dance floor at a prom that ended 30 years ago. Still flexing, still trying, still stuck in the past, and somehow, still lovable. Every success story has a missing chapter, something buried in a filing cabinet, stored on a dusty hard drive, or shelved with a post-it that says, "Not quite right." For Johnny Bravo, that missing piece is the unaired pilot. And like all great lost episodes, it tells you something the main series couldn't. It shows you the version of the show that almost was, and how dangerously close Johnny came to fading into obscurity before his pompadour ever hit the screen. This is the story of network hesitation, pilot limbo, and the cartoon that got rebuilt from the ground up. Let's start with the basics. Before a full season of Johnny Bravo was greenlit, a standalone pilot was developed. Not the What a Cartoon shorts, those were promotional one-offs. This was a full, 11-minute episode that was pitched directly to the executives as a prototype for what the show would look like as a weekly series. It featured most of the familiar elements. Johnny's iconic design, Jeff Bennett's voice, the fast-paced visual style, the core comedic formula, confidence, rejection, oblivious flex. But this version of Johnny was a little different. The tone was a touch darker, the pacing was slower, and Johnny's personality veered more into satirical jerk than lovable fool. He was less of a man-child and more of a cartoon Casanova who just kept missing the mark. Which, as it turns out, made executives nervous. The original pilot, simply referred to internally as Bravo Pilot Number 1, didn't land quite the way the creators hoped. Some network execs thought it was too adult. Some thought it lacked structure. And others simply didn't get it. To be fair, it wasn't a typical cartoon pitch. Most kids' shows in the mid-90s had clear moral lessons, kid-friendly protagonists, sidekick-driven plots, merch potential. Johnny Bravo had none of that. No toys, no redeeming arcs, no clear good guy moment. He wasn't relatable. He was ridiculous. And that scared people. After feedback rolled in, Van Partible and the team made a crucial pivot. Johnny needed to be dumber. Not just silly, full-blown, utterly unaware. Because that's what unlocked the magic. In the pilot, Johnny was still trying to be suave. In the rewrite, he thought he was suave but came across like a malfunctioning action figure. This version tested better. Why? Because the audience didn't see Johnny as a threat. They saw him as a clown. A gym bro chasing a world that had moved on without him. And that turned him from an edgy anti-hero into a satire-safe himbo. Think of it like flipping the switch from egotist to golden retriever energy in a leather jacket. Even after the rewrite, there was tension between the show's creators and the network. On one side, you had Van Partible and his team, trying to keep the show's satire sharp. They wanted to poke fun at gender dynamics, media tropes, and macho idiocy without getting preachy. On the other side, the network wanted more slapstick, less subtext, and maybe throw in a fart joke or two. This show eventually struck a middle ground, but you can feel the tonal shifts, especially comparing early episodes to later seasons. The pilot, which never aired publicly, has been described by former staff as funny, but too clever. A kind of internal version of the show that lived in the minds of the creators, but didn't fit the Saturday morning cartoon mold. It was locked away, possibly forever. Over the years, rumors swirled about the lost Johnny Bravo pilot. Some claimed to have VHS recordings from old test screenings. Others swore it aired once late at night and was never seen again. Online forums in the 2000s buzzed with bootleg screenshots and unverified clips of blurry Johnny saying lines never heard in the final series. To date, the pilot hasn't been officially released, but fragments have leaked. A few storyboard frames, some early voice tests, and a rough animatic that circulated in niche animation circles. For fans and historians, it's a ghost, a version of Johnny that was almost canon, a reminder that every hit show is built on a graveyard of what-ifs. The unaired pilot reveals something important, not just about Johnny, but about cartoon creation in general. That early version, it was smarter, sharper, maybe even funnier, but it didn't fit. It lacked a clean read that audiences and networks needed. Johnny's not a role model. He's not a villain. He's the butt of the joke. Once that clicked, the show found its footing. The rewrite softened his edges, but kept the core. The delusion, the swagger, the endless, glorious failures. In a way, Johnny Bravo's Lost Pilot is the biggest what-if in the show's history. What if they'd gone with the original tone? Would it have become a cult hit for older audiences? Would it have flamed out in one season? Would Cartoon Network have doubled down on adult satire years before Adult Swim was even a twinkle in Ted Turner's eye? Hard to say, but we do know this. The version of Johnny that made it to air wasn't the watered-down one. It was the refined one. A better joke, a sharper satire, wrapped in banana yellow hair gel and padded out with ego. The Lost Pilot mattered, but only as a stepping stone. There's something weirdly poetic about Johnny Bravo having a lost episode. He's the kind of character who feels like he came from a dream. A feverish blend of nostalgia, parody, and sweat. A man out of time who never knew time moved on. That unaired pilot is a relic from a universe where Johnny took himself just a bit too seriously. And maybe that's the biggest punchline of all. Johnny only works when we get the joke, and he doesn't. Let's roll the tape on Season 1, the real Season 1. The one that aired in 1997. The one with Van Partible still in the driver's seat. And the one that, for a brief moment in time, made Johnny Bravo feel like a weird little masterpiece. Because here's the deal. Season 1 didn't just introduce Johnny to the world. It gave us a glimpse into what could have been if Cartoon Network had leaned harder into satire and let Johnny go full Adult Swim. Years before Adult Swim even existed. It was fast. It was sharp. And honestly, it was a little too good for Saturday morning. Let's break it down. Visually, Season 1 was stunning in a minimalist, punch-you-in-the-eyes kind of way. Everything was stylized. Bold outlines. Simple geometric backgrounds. Flat color palettes of hot pinks, banana yellows, reds, and neon blues. No gradients, no soft shadows, just clean, confident design choices. It looked like a vintage cartoon that fell through a time portal, hit a 90s alt comedy writer, and woke up in a Hanna-Barbera conference room. Johnny himself was built like a refrigerator with legs. He barely had knees. He took up most of the screen and didn't know what to do with it. And somehow, that made it feel cinematic. Every frame of Season 1 looked like it could be a freeze frame on a lunchbox or a poster at a retro-themed tattoo shop. The secret sauce of Season 1 was its tone. It wasn't just random gags and pratfalls. The humor was layered. You had pop culture references, social satire, irony on top of irony, episodes that parodied entire genres, kung fu flicks, romantic comedies, sci-fi B-movies. And yet it was all packed into 7-minute segments. The pacing was tight. The punchlines came fast. And best of all, Johnny never learned a thing. You might have missed it as a kid, but the show was built on a darkly comedic engine. The world moves on, but Johnny doesn't. And that disconnect, that's where all the gold lived. Now let's get to the real reason Season 1 was doomed to change. It was a little too adult. Not in a raunchy way, there was no crude humor, no inappropriate content. But in tone, the jokes were smart, the references were for adults, and the worldview was kinda bleak. Johnny wasn't a relatable protagonist. He was a warning sign, an echo of outdated masculinity doomed to walk the earth saying whoa, mama to women who wanted nothing to do with him. That's hilarious to a 30-year-old watching through a postmodern lens. But to a 9-year-old, it just felt confusing. Why does this guy get punched every episode? Why doesn't he have friends? Why is he so sad when he's alone? That's the subtext Season 1 accidentally injected into Saturday mornings. One of the coolest things about Season 1, it was packed with celebrity cameos and weird one-off characters that shouldn't have worked, but totally did. You had Farrah Fawcett teaching Johnny to be a better person. Donny Osmond appearing multiple times as himself, fully aware he was in a cartoon. Adam West voicing himself as a bizarro parody of his Batman persona, pre-Family Guy days. And these weren't just stunt appearances. They were meta. This show knew exactly how weird it was and leaned into it. Which, again, makes sense when you realize a lot of the writers came from the same brain space as shows like Freakazoid, Animaniacs, and The Tick. This wasn't just slapstick. It was commentary wearing slapstick's clothes. The average Johnny Bravo episode in Season 1 followed a consistent rhythm. Johnny wants something, attention, affection, validation, usually from a woman who does not care. He tries too hard, with pickup lines, over-the-top stunts, or bizarre feats of strength. Reality hits him, literally and metaphorically. He shrugs it off and resets by the next scene. It was like Groundhog Day for toxic confidence. And while the formula was repetitive by design, it allowed for a huge amount of experimentation in how Johnny failed. Sometimes he fell out of a plane. Sometimes he got thrown through a wall. Sometimes he just got friend-zoned so hard it echoed into the next scene. But every time, he stood up, adjusted his shades, and flexed like nothing happened. That made him funny, but it also made him weirdly tragic. And that weird tragedy, that's what made Season 1 so special. Behind the scenes, Cartoon Network wasn't totally sure what to make of Season 1's reception. Critics liked it. College kids liked it. Animation nerds loved it. But the core Saturday morning demo, they were kinda puzzled. Some found it funny. Others didn't know if Johnny was the hero or the joke. And the merchandising department, not happy. How do you sell lunchboxes and action figures of a guy whose entire character arc is fails constantly and never grows? You don't. So even before the season wrapped, network notes started rolling in. Make it funnier. Make it simpler. Make Johnny less sarcastic and more silly. Van Partible had a decision to make. And ultimately, by the time Season 2 was underway, he was out, replaced by new writers and a softer, more kid-friendly tone. Even though it only lasted 13 episodes, Season 1 of Johnny Bravo has aged like wine. Specifically, like the kind of wine you drink out of a coffee mug while rewatching retro cartoons at 2 a.m. and wondering why this show hits you in the gut now. It was visually daring, intellectually sharper than it had any right to be, and anchored by a protagonist who was both ridiculous and quietly heartbreaking. Johnny Bravo, in Season 1, wasn't just a clown. He was a symbol of arrested development, of outdated masculinity, of how we all sometimes live in a world that stopped making sense the moment we peaked in middle school. And that's powerful stuff, especially when it's dressed in a black t-shirt and sunglasses. Let's talk about the way Johnny Bravo looked. Because before you even hear the voice, before the first "whoa, mama," before Johnny even opens his delusion-soaked mouth, you know exactly what kind of cartoon this is. Big head, tiny waist, biceps like two inflated beach balls, shades so black they absorbed plot lines, and a jawline sculpted by the gods of 1950s billboard ads. But Johnny wasn't just a character. He was a visual statement. And that statement was, let's make a cartoon that looks like it was assembled in Microsoft Paint by someone with a caffeine problem and a graphic design degree from outer space. Let's get into it. Johnny Bravo's design philosophy was bold minimalism. The backgrounds were flat. The details were sparse. The colors were punchy, loud, and almost offensively bright. Everything was built out of rectangles, triangles, and ovals. No curves unless absolutely necessary. No shading unless it was there to punch you in the optic nerve. And it worked. Not because it was pretty, but because it was iconic. You could recognize a Johnny Bravo scene from across the room. That red backdrop. That blue house. That banana yellow shirt in the background getting karate chopped by a grandmother with zero context. At first glance, you might think, this looks kinda cheap. And you'd be right, but also wrong. Because while the style was inexpensive to animate, it was also intentional. Here's why. Clarity over detail. Kids needed to follow the action instantly. No clutter. No ambiguity. Speed over texture. Johnny was all about fast pacing and visual gags. The simpler the style, the easier it was to animate exaggerated poses and slapstick chaos. Stylization over realism. Johnny's world wasn't meant to look real. It was meant to look deliriously artificial because he was deliriously artificial. Everything from the buildings to the background extras had the same design rule. If it takes longer than 30 seconds to draw, scrap it. This made the show feel more like a visual joke than a living, reading world. Which, for Johnny, was perfect. Johnny Bravo doesn't live in the real world. He lives in his own aesthetic delusion. His house, way too big. His walls, unfurnished and always pastel. His town, empty except for whatever he needs to fill in that episode. In fact, the entire visual language of the show subtly reinforces Johnny's worldview. Backgrounds don't distract from Johnny because Johnny thinks he's the star. Side characters are simpler in design because Johnny doesn't really notice them. Color schemes shift wildly from scene to scene because Johnny's attention span is shorter than an 11-minute runtime. It's like watching a sitcom that's been turned into a pop art painting and then run over by a muscle car. Animation is expensive. Every frame you draw costs money. So to survive the 90s, you had to get clever. Johnny Bravo's animators used stylized simplicity to cheat the system in genius ways. Examples. Johnny's flexing silhouette could be reused in dozens of scenes. Exaggerated facial expressions were done with 2 or 3 keyframes, letting voice acting carry the load. Characters often popped into frame without walking in, eliminating the need for complicated movement cycles. And instead of animating full dialogue sequences with expressive body language, Johnny often froze in absurd poses while his voice carried the scene. The result? This show looked like a slideshow from a fever dream. And it worked. You've heard people describe things as looking like clip art, usually as an insult. But for Johnny Bravo, that was the goal. He was clip art come to life. His sunglasses, clip art. His poses, clip art. His car, giant yellow rectangle with wheels. And that wasn't a failure. It was a branding decision. You could draw Johnny in 5 lines and still know it was him. You could spot his walk cycle from across a crowded cartoon lineup. He was built to be instantly recognizable and hilariously hard to take seriously. He looked like a guy who was trying to be a poster. Which fit because Johnny doesn't just want attention, he wants to be iconic. And ironically, he succeeded. Let's get a little technical. Johnny Bravo was animated in a pipeline that was script heavy, storyboard driven, overseas animated. The art style made it easier to outsource without losing consistency. Every line was bold and flat, meaning fewer variables in visual quality. And because there was less motion per frame, artists could focus more on timing than smoothness. That's why Johnny's movements feel so sudden. He doesn't flow. He lurches. He doesn't gesture. He strikes poses. He's not fluid. He's explosive. Like a meme in motion. A little known fact about the show. Many of the backgrounds were designed with intentionally minimal detail so the focus would never drift away from the foreground action. You might see a single couch in a giant living room. A blank wall with one crooked painting. A street with no people, no parked cars, and no shadows. It's like the animators were challenging you to ask, wait, does anyone else live here? Answer, no. It's just Johnny, and maybe a camera crew we never see. Johnny Bravo's design choices influenced more shows than you'd expect. That bold outlined, limited motion, retro minimalist style helped pave the way for Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, even Family Guy in its earliest rough design phase. Why? Because Johnny proved you didn't need Pixar-level detail to be iconic. You needed silhouette. You needed color confidence. You needed a visual language that matched the tone. And Johnny's tone was always loud, dumb, and self-absorbed, so his world reflected that. When critics first saw Johnny Bravo, some called it ugly. Harsh lines, basic colors, squashed animation. But over time, that look became nostalgic. It became shorthand for a specific kind of humor. The kind that didn't need polish to be funny. Just timing, delivery, and a big dumb guy saying, "Man, I look good," while getting body slammed into a vending machine. The art style wasn't a failure. It was the perfect joke. Johnny looked ridiculous because Johnny was ridiculous. And in doing so, he became one of the most visually memorable cartoons of his era. Let's pause for a second. We've talked about Johnny Bravo, the character, the punchline, the walking chest day. But now, let's talk about the only person in his life who consistently shows him love, patience, and spaghetti. Bunny Bravo, Johnny's mom. She's the pink-dressed, poodle-haired, sweetly unhinged suburban angel who floats around his world like a cross between Donna Reed, a Disney grandma, and a cruise ship bingo host who's had one too many strawberry daiquiris. And if you're asking yourself, wait, why does a 27-year-old man still live at home with his mother who calls him Johnny Kins? Well, welcome to the emotional core of this fever dream. Because Johnny and Bunny Bravo aren't just a sitcom gag. They're a full-on case study in cartoon codependency. Let's break it down. First off, Johnny lives with his mom. No rent, no job, no social security card in sight. He's a fully grown man-child with 24/7 access to home-cooked meals, clean laundry, and endless emotional support. And Bunny, she loves it. She doesn't just tolerate Johnny, she adores him. Like, irrationally. She defends him, feeds him, buys his clothes, drives him to dates, and cheers him on no matter how absurd his behavior is. It's less he's my son and more he's my overgrown toddler with biceps and no future. Bunny is. A lot. She's got that pastel pink dress she never changes. A voice that lives somewhere between a kindergarten teacher and a 1960s stewardess. Boundless optimism and delusional levels of maternal pride. In many ways, she's the only normal person in Johnny's life. But she's also part of the problem. Because Bunny has enabled Johnny's delusions for decades. When he fails at something, she praises him anyway. When he's rejected, she says, "That girl wasn't good enough for you, sweetie." When he gets suplexed by an angry woman at a diner, she asks if he wants pancakes. It's the kind of mom-son dynamic that would be funny in a sketch. And deeply concerning in real life. The Bravo household feels like it was pulled straight from a 1950s sitcom, but warped through a 90s surrealist filter. The house is overly tidy. The living room is full of lace and floral patterns. The kitchen always has cookies. And Bunny is always waiting in the wings, ready to love, support, and gently gaslight her son into believing he's perfect. She's a parody of the classic TV mom archetype. June Cleaver, Carol Brady, Betty Draper. But in the Bravo universe, she's not just a background character. She's crucial. Because without Bunny, Johnny has nothing. No job, no purpose, no external validation, no one who tells him he's special. Bunny is the only reason Johnny's fragile ego hasn't completely crumbled into a protein shake. Let's call it what it is, codependency. Johnny relies on Bunny for housing, emotional validation, confidence boosters, probably grocery money, and Bunny relies on Johnny for purpose, a sense of usefulness, someone to spoil after what we assume was a very fast divorce from a man who absolutely couldn't handle the Bravo energy. They're locked in a dynamic where he never has to grow up, and she never has to let go. It's sweet, and kind of tragic. Johnny isn't just stuck in adolescence because he's immature. He's stuck because his home life won't let him evolve. And deep down, neither of them wants to. Bunny doesn't leave the house much. Most of her scenes happen in the living room, the kitchen, the front porch. She's like a sitcom ghost. Always there, always warm, always looping the same dialogue, like, "Oh, Johnny Kins, you're just so handsome. That girl must have been blind." It's comforting, until you realize she's frozen in time. She never questions why Johnny isn't dating anyone. She never challenges his reality. She just smiles and bakes. and that makes her both the show's heart and one of its strangest characters. Let's theorize for a moment, because the show never tells us what happened to Johnny's dad. We can guess a few things. Divorce? Probably. Death? Possible. Vanished into the void. Cartoons are weird like that. What matters is, Bunny has built her life entirely around Johnny. No friends. No career. No hobbies besides homemaking and mothering. It's not a traditional nuclear family, it's a self-contained orbit. And Johnny is the son. Or at least, the self-proclaimed son. Bunny's best moments come in the small, strange lines. Like, "Don't worry, honey, I think rejection builds character. And you're just so full of character. Now remember, sweetie, never take candy from strangers, unless they're cute. I'm proud of you no matter how badly you fail, Johnny." These lines sound sweet, but they're loaded. They show us. Bunny knows Johnny's delusional. She knows he fails constantly. And she supports him anyway. It's love, but it's also enabling. It's unconditional support with zero growth attached. And that's what makes it fascinating. Here's the thing. Bunny Bravo shouldn't work as a character. She's one-dimensional, static, predictable. And yet, she does work. Because she's the perfect emotional counterweight to Johnny. He's chaos. She's calm. He's delusional. She's affirming. He's a hurricane of unmet needs. She's an umbrella made of pink frosting. Without Bunny, the show would feel cruel. With her, it feels oddly cozy. It's not a healthy relationship, but it's a familiar one, especially to anyone who's ever had a mom, grandma, or aunt who refused to stop treating them like a 5-year-old. Johnny Bravo isn't just about rejection and ego. It's about comfort zones. It's about people who never change because the world around them keeps cushioning the fall. Bunny Bravo is that cushion. She bakes the cookies. She fluffs the ego. She keeps the delusion alive. And somehow, in all that weird maternal affection, she becomes one of the most memorable cartoon moms of the 90s. Not because she grows, but because she never stops loving a son who absolutely does not deserve it and never will. Johnny Bravo may be the star of the show, but let's be honest, if it were just 22 minutes of him striking poses and getting rejected, you'd be out faster than his dates. Luckily, Johnny didn't exist in a vacuum. He existed in a cartoon ecosystem of weirdos, foils, and characters way smarter, or at least way more interesting, than him. And that's what kept the show from collapsing under its own flex. Because for all the spotlight Johnny hogged, it was the supporting cast that made his world feel absurdly alive. They were the mirrors, the critics, the babysitters, the enablers, and in many ways, the real stars of the show. Let's start with the pint-sized philosopher herself, little Susie. Susie is Johnny's next-door neighbor. She's maybe 7 years old. She wears pigtails, carries a lollipop the size of her face, and has the emotional intelligence of a licensed therapist with a side hustle in tactical surveillance. Susie is the anti-Johnny. Where he's delusional, she's brutally honest. Where he's obsessed with adult validation, she's perfectly fine just existing. Where he fails, she watches and judges like a Greek chorus in jelly sandals. She's also terrifyingly self-aware. Susie doesn't just outsmart Johnny, she controls entire episodes by sheer force of personality. She walks into his house, rearranges the furniture of his life, and leaves with a smile and a sugar rush. Most cartoons have the cute neighbor kid. But Susie isn't just cute. She's low-key unhinged. In the best way. She says things like, "You're gonna die alone, Mr. Bravo. Don't worry, I'll be here to take care of your mom when she's old. You smell like hairspray and insecurity." And she says it all with a giggle. She's a paradox. Too smart for her age. Too innocent to be threatening. Too sassy to be ignored. In a way, she represents childhood itself, raw, honest, chaotic, and totally unimpressed by adult nonsense. And in Johnny's case, she's a walking reminder that his entire persona is transparent. Now let's talk about Carl. Carl is Johnny's best friend, or at least his most available friend. He's tall, gangly, awkward, and shaped like a rubber band that got microwaved. Where Johnny is all biceps and bravado, Carl is nervous, nerdy, kinda sweet, and clearly just one rejection away from adopting 12 cats. Carl is the guy who would never hit on a woman, not because he's shy, but because he's pretty sure that even asking would cause a dimensional rift. He's voiced by Tom Kenny, and his delivery is gold. Every line is a spiral of passive-aggressive enthusiasm and subtle pain. And somehow, he grounds the show. Johnny and Carl aren't just opposites, they're symbiotic. Carl exists to highlight just how emotionally bankrupt Johnny is. And Johnny exists to show how emotionally aware Carl could be if he wasn't so emotionally suppressed by constant secondhand embarrassment. Their friendship is toxic, weirdly functional, full of moments that feel like rejected friends be plots written by someone in a bathrobe. You get the sense that Carl needs Johnny to feel cooler by proximity, and Johnny needs Carl to feel superior. It's tragic. It's hilarious. It's basically every sitcom friendship since Seinfeld. Beyond Susie and Carl, this show also had a rotating cast of one-off characters and guest stars that served one key function: parody, and lots of it. Johnny Bravo loved making fun of kung fu movies, old monster flicks, superhero comics, James Bond-style spies, sci-fi tropes, game shows, soap operas, infomercials, and everything in between. Episodes often felt like mini sketch parodies wrapped in cartoon logic. You'd start with Johnny trying to flirt with a lifeguard, and end with him battling a sentient piece of toast in a Godzilla-style death match. And somehow, it always felt intentional. We mentioned a few earlier, but let's run the highlight reel. Adam West, voicing a parody version of himself years before Family Guy made it cool. He played a delusional action hero who believed he was the real star of the show. Donny Osmond played himself, but as a clingy neighbor who kept crashing Johnny's adventures. Farrah Fawcett showed up to teach Johnny about inner beauty and left with more dignity than anyone should be allowed to keep in a cartoon like this. These weren't just cameos. They were meta jokes. Winks to the audience that said, yeah, we know this show makes no sense. That's the point. It made Johnny Bravo feel like part of a larger cartoon multiverse, one where any celebrity, monster, or trope could just show up. Because Johnny was never the main character in his own world. He was just the guy in the wrong story every time. Susie grounded Johnny. Carl gave him contrast. The guest stars gave him scale. Together, they did something really clever. They made Johnny's failures more interesting. Because he didn't just fail at things. He failed around people who knew better. And that made it funny, not mean-spirited. It turned Johnny into a kind of cartoon Don Quixote, charging into every scenario with the confidence of a man who thinks he's starring in Top Gun but ends up in Gilligan's Island. Cartoons often live or die by their leads. But Johnny Bravo succeeded because the world around Johnny was so well-balanced. Each supporting character had a distinct voice, understood the assignment, and treated Johnny like the cosmic joke he was. They weren't just props. They were participants in the chaos. Susie teased him like a big brother who failed upward. Carl pitied him like a guy who knows this friendship is dragging him down. And the world itself just sort of nodded, shrugged, and let Johnny walk into another wall. There's an art to cartoon chemistry. Too much ensemble, and you dilute the brand. Too little, and you get stuck in a loop. Johnny Bravo walked the line perfectly. It let Johnny be dumb because everyone else was smart. It let Johnny stay static because everyone else grew around him. And somehow, through all the pop culture riffs and side character chaos, it built a universe that felt alive, even if it was held together by hair gel and denial. We've reached the final stretch of Johnny Bravo's original run, Season 1. 13 episodes. That's it. And when it ended, it left behind a lot of confused viewers, mixed signals from the network, and a question that still echoes through the hallways of retro animation forums. Was Johnny Bravo canceled too soon? Not in the traditional cut before its prime sense. It got renewed. It got retooled. It ran for multiple seasons. But this version, the original vision crafted by Van Partible, the sharply satirical, deceptively smart, visually striking Season 1. That version, it vanished after 13 episodes. Let's unpack why. On the surface, Season 1 did okay. It didn't break records. It didn't flop. The ratings were decent, especially with teens and older kids. Merchandise interest was low, and execs were nervous about its tone. This is the classic animation dilemma. Critically clever rarely equals commercially safe. Cartoon Network was still figuring itself out in 1997. It didn't yet have the freedom it would later enjoy with Adult Swim, Toonami, or experimental comedy. Johnny Bravo existed in a gray area. Too satirical for young kids. Too broad for animation snobs. Too weird for mainstream merchandise. And in an era where cartoons lived or died based on how well they sold action figures, Johnny was already on the back foot. Here's what made season 1 special. It was layered. At face value, it was a show about a guy who got rejected a lot. But beneath the surface, it was a parody of outdated masculinity, a commentary on arrested development, a visual experiment in flat, minimalist design, a showcase for subversive writing and genre spoofing. It wasn't trying to be deep. It just was, because the creators were pouring everything they had into it. It felt like a show made by weird, clever people who didn't expect a second season, so they left it all on the field. And for animation fans who caught it at the right time, it hit different. When season 1 ended, there was a pause. Not a full cancellation, more like a we'll call you kind of silence. Behind the scenes, Cartoon Network was reviewing notes. Kids liked Johnny's voice. They liked the punchlines. They didn't understand the satire. So, by the time season 2 went into production, Van Partible was gone. New writers came in, and the tone changed dramatically. Johnny became goofier. The satire gave way to slapstick. The backgrounds got even simpler. The pace got faster. And Johnny, once a parody of the alpha male, became more of a punch-drunk cartoon idiot. Still fun. Still iconic. But something changed. The edge was gone. There's a term in TV writing called network sanitization. It's when a show gets softened, simplified, or broadened to appeal to a wider audience. That's what happened to Johnny Bravo. The new version was safer, brighter, more reliant on simple humor, less dependent on irony or subtext. To be clear, it wasn't bad. It just wasn't that version of Johnny Bravo anymore. The smart dumb balance tipped fully into dumb dumb. The adult nods faded, and Johnny lost a bit of his identity. In the moment, most viewers didn't notice. Kids watching the reruns didn't care which season it was. Johnny was still yelling catchphrases and getting drop-kicked. He was still funny, still quotable, still flexing like his bones were made of rebar. But older fans did notice. And in the years that followed, especially in the early days of YouTube and fan retrospectives, season 1 started gaining a reputation. Wait, wasn't this show kind of smart? Did Johnny Bravo actually have something to say? Why do these early episodes feel like satire now? It became a classic case of a cartoon aging into its own audience. What felt like a joke in 1997 started to feel like a commentary in 2007. By 2020, it was cultural shorthand. Johnny Bravo became a reference point in discussions of the himbo archetype, masculine insecurity, media self-awareness, subversive animation of the late 90s. And most of that came from just 13 episodes. So, what if it hadn't been retooled? What if Van Partible had stayed on? What if Cartoon Network had said, let's lean into the satire, even if the kids don't get it right away? We might have gotten a BoJack Horseman-style descent into Johnny's delusion. A long-form arc where Buddy tries to set boundaries and Johnny spirals. Meta-commentary on TV tropes and genre structure long before Adventure Time or regular show took that baton. In short, we might have gotten something legendary. But instead, we got something strange. A perfect first season, followed by a show that rebranded itself into something safer. That still somehow became iconic anyway. And maybe that's even more interesting. Today, season 1 of Johnny Bravo is seen as a time capsule, a near-perfect cartoon experiment, a precursor to adult animation trends, and a love letter to both cartoon history and the future of satire. It never got a revival. It never got a reboot. And honestly, that's probably for the best. Because those 13 episodes now live in a strange cartoon afterlife, rewatched on streaming, clipped for nostalgia, and studied by animators who were still in middle school when they first aired. And maybe, in a way, that's better than mainstream success. Johnny didn't need a perfect arc. He didn't need to evolve. He just needed 13 episodes, a lot of flexing, and a world weird enough to let him exist. When Johnny Bravo returned for season 2, something had changed. Not just in the animation, not just in the voice acting, though those shifted too, but in the vibe. Gone was the razor-sharp satire. Gone were the quieter, really profound beats of a man trapped in his own ego. Gone, even, was the subtle commentary on masculinity and rejection. In its place, something brighter, bouncier, safer. Johnny Bravo was still Johnny. But now, he was living in a cartoon that didn't know it used to be smarter. Welcome to the soft reboot. A soft reboot is when a show doesn't officially change its story or characters, but subtly reshapes itself to appeal to a broader or different audience. Nothing's canonically erased. No one says, hey, remember that time we were meta-satire? But everything feels just slightly off. That's what happened in season 2. Johnny still looked like Johnny. Bunny was still around. Carl returned. Susie made appearances. But the writing, the tone, the pacing, they hit a reset button without announcing it. Behind the scenes, Van Partible was gone. After season 1, the network brought in new showrunners and writers to make Johnny Bravo more accessible and more kid-friendly. Translation: let's make him dumber, the jokes simpler, and the world less weird. The writing staff now included people like Butch Hartman, who would go on to create the Fairly Odd Parents. Other comedy writers known for their quick gag structure and pop culture heavy jokes. This show shifted from subversive social parody to bright, zany, slapstick comedy with fast-moving jokes and catchphrases. Still funny, still fun, but different. The animation got a noticeable glow-up, and not in the artistic sense. The color palette got brighter. Backgrounds had slightly more detail. Character design softened. Johnny, in particular, looked a little rounder. His movements were smoother. His facial expressions were goofier. Compare a season 1 walk cycle, where Johnny lumbers around like a wax sculpture held together by hubris, to season 2, where he almost bounces like a Looney Tune. And that's not accidental. The animators leaned into a style that could sustain faster, broader comedy. Less noir, more neon. It worked for the new tone. But it also meant Johnny was now less delusional alpha and more high-functioning cartoon idiot. One of the most noticeable changes. Johnny got dumber. In season 1, he was arrogant and oblivious, but not totally devoid of awareness. You got the sense that he almost got the joke. That somewhere, deep beneath the muzzle, a tiny flicker of shame was hiding. Season 2 Johnny, that light is completely out. He becomes more easily distracted, more aggressively confident, more cartoonishly idiotic in his logic. He talks to fish. He mistakes aliens for Girl Scouts. He forgets how doors work. And somehow, it works because the show built its new identity around that. But something about it feels safer. The risks are gone. The emotional depth, gone. The accidental tragedy, absolutely gone. This is Johnny Bravo the mascot, not Johnny Bravo the character. Season 2 also shifted in how episodes were structured. In season 1, most episodes were tight, single-story segments. The humor was compact. The writing was deliberate. In season 2 and beyond, episodes often included 2 or 3 shorter segments within a single episode. Quick gags, musical montages, or skit-like bits. Recurring format jokes. This gave the show a sketch comedy feel, more like Animaniacs or Rocko's Modern Life than the story-driven satire it began as. It made the show more digestible, more rerun-friendly, more merchandisable, but also more forgettable. The jokes flew faster, but landed lighter. The new tone brought a different energy into the writing. Now you had more pop culture spoofs, more fourth wall breaking, more celebrity parody, fewer character arcs, fewer emotional beats. Johnny might still get rejected, but it didn't sting anymore. He was too oblivious to care, and the show was too busy throwing pie jokes to notice. If season 1 made you laugh and think, Season 2 just wanted to make you laugh as quickly and frequently as possible. Yes, and no. Yes, because this show stayed on air. It found a younger audience. It became more widely accepted by Cartoon Network's daytime lineup. Johnny Bravo became a pop culture icon, solidified by reruns and memes. No, because the deeper fans, the ones who saw the original vision, noticed the shift. Some of the satire was lost. This show slowly drifted away from the emotional anchor that made Johnny interesting beyond the punchlines. Still, even this soft reboot era had charm. There were brilliant moments. Guest writers brought in surreal humor. The art style hit its stride. Johnny remained endearing, even when his IQ was clearly scribbled on a cocktail napkin. But the show was now fully a comedy vehicle, not a character study. And that distinction matters, especially when you're talking about longevity. This soft reboot wasn't a disaster. In fact, for many fans, this is the version of Johnny they remember best. Loud, bizarre, quick-hitting, and endlessly quotable. But to those who saw Johnny Bravo as more than just a joke, Season 2 marked the moment the show stopped challenging itself. It stopped saying something about Johnny, and just let Johnny be. And honestly, that's fine. Not every cartoon needs to be dissected in a philosophy class. But there's something a little bittersweet about seeing a show that started with teeth come back with a smile and a thumbs up. Still charming, still iconic, but no longer dangerous. Let's talk about the man who stepped in after Van Partible stepped out. A man whose influence would quietly reshape the second wind of Johnny Bravo, and whose later creations would go on to define early 2000s Nickelodeon. Butch Hartman. Yes, that Butch Hartman. The guy behind the Fairly Odd Parents, Danny Phantom, TUFF Puppy, and a bunch of cartoons with shiny eyes and loud noises. Back before he had his own studio, his own controversies, and a generation of kids quoting Cosmo and Wanda until the walls cracked, Hartman was just another writer trying to make Cartoon Network laugh. And when he stepped into the Johnny Bravo writer's room during the show's tonal pivot in Season 2, things got a little weird. Let's break down exactly what changed, and how this new version of Johnny, while less satirical, was still kind of genius in its own unhinged way. Butch Hartman brought with him a specific style, a formula that would later become signature Nickelodeon comedy. Fast-paced dialogue, rapid-fire sight gags, characters shouting their feelings at each other, escalating absurdity as the punchline, morally safe chaos. And when that formula collided with the already goofy DNA of Johnny Bravo, you got something new. Johnny Bravo was Looney Tune. He was louder. He was dumber. And now, he was also increasingly aware of how ridiculous his world was, without ever quite realizing he was the problem. One of the big tonal shifts was that Johnny started behaving less like a character and more like a living cartoon archetype. In Season 1, Johnny's ego made sense because the world humored it, then rejected it. In Season 2, the world barely blinked. It embraced his stupidity. It met him with a shrug and a pie in the face. The result? Johnny now existed in a universe where physics didn't matter. Logic was optional. Every scenario could reset after a blackout gag. And this shift felt very Hartman-esque. Think Cosmo from Fairly Odd Parents, the Crimson Chin, basically every character in TUFF Puppy. Hartman was a master of weaponized cartoon logic, and that energy seeped into Johnny's DNA the moment he got involved. One of the most noticeable changes in this reinvention, the gag rate increased a lot. Episodes now jumped from setting to setting faster, relied on repeated visual motifs, tossed in non sequitur characters that appeared once and vanished forever, loved absurd dialogue like, "I don't know where I am, but this place smells like cheese and existential regret." These weren't jokes built on irony or satire. They were just funny because they were weird. And honestly, sometimes, that's enough. This phase of Johnny Bravo didn't try to be smart, and that gave it freedom. It could make Johnny fall in love with a vending machine. It could send him into space for no reason. It could introduce an evil twin who wasn't evil, just slightly more polite. It was stupid on purpose. And when it worked, it was hilarious. Remember how, in Season 1, Johnny was a parody of masculinity? By Season 2 and beyond, Johnny was no longer a parody of anything. He was just himself, a pure cartoon entity who existed to get yelled at, get rejected, get launched into the sky, get confused by ducks wearing sunglasses. He became less metaphor and more mascot. Still lovable, still iconic, but no longer a commentary. And that shift made the show easier to watch and easier to sell. This reinvention didn't just affect Johnny. Other characters also caught the goofball virus. Carl became even more cartoonishly neurotic, now visibly sweating through scenes, mumbling full monologues under his breath, and occasionally speaking in riddles. Susie leaned harder into Chaos Agent territory, sometimes delivering full lectures about wormholes and then stepping away with a popsicle. Random new characters were introduced who existed only to get in the way, like a talking mailman, a psychic toupee, or a sentient pizza with abandonment issues. This show had become modular. Each episode was its own wacky world, like a sketch show with the same lead character playing a different version of himself each time. Let's be clear. This wasn't a failure. It was a choice, a strategic move to keep the show alive, and it worked. Johnny Bravo in this new form became more marketable, fit better into Cartoon Network's evolving lineup, could run for multiple seasons without losing steam, appealed to younger kids who just wanted jokes and explosions, not satire and social commentary. It sacrificed depth for accessibility, but it never lost its sense of fun. And in doing so, it kept Johnny Bravo alive long enough for a new generation to discover him. For all the criticism that this reinvention sometimes gets, there's something you have to admit. Butch Hartman understood how to write a show that moves. Pacing, escalation, exaggerated reactions, all of it kept Johnny Bravo feeling alive, even after its first identity had been retired. He gave Johnny more energy, more volume, more absurdism. And while it may have lost some of the charm of Season 1 satire, it gained a new kind of cartoon identity, one that stuck with kids long after the original episodes ended. This version of Johnny Bravo, loud, silly, and endlessly quotable, became the version most people remember. It's the Johnny of reruns, the Johnny of memes, the Johnny of VHS tapes worn out from too many rewatches. It wasn't the Johnny who made you think, it was the Johnny who made you laugh. And sometimes, that's enough. Let's start with the obvious. Yes, Johnny Bravo got dumber. Not just a little dumber. Not just oops, I locked myself out of the house again dumb. We're talking forget how to open a door, gets into a fistfight with a mannequin, confuses a rock for a date level dumb. And the show, it got weirder, faster, louder, less grounded in anything resembling Earth logic. But here's the twist. That shift wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It was the result of intentionally leaning into cartoon entropy and trusting that audiences didn't need a coherent world as long as the punchlines landed. Let's unpack how we got here and why Johnny becoming a full-blown lunatic was actually kind of brilliant. In Season 1, Johnny was a satirical himbo. He thought he was cool, but the world knew better. He was a joke about masculinity, not just a joke with muscles. But in later seasons, Johnny morphed into something different. He became a pure comedy vessel. He wasn't a parody of men anymore. He was a parody of cartoon characters. Think about it. Bugs Bunny breaks the fourth wall. Homer Simpson gets progressively dumber as the seasons go on. SpongeBob cries, screams, and breaks physics regularly. Johnny joined that club. He stopped being a man in the narrative sense and became a cartoon logic organism. This made him more unpredictable, more chaotic, and weirdly, more fun to watch in short bursts. The laws of Johnny's universe also began to unravel. In early episodes, Johnny walks around town, fails at dating, gets hurt in ways that resemble reality. In later episodes, he rides a horse into a mall and opens a sushi bar. He's shrunk down to the size of a hot dog. He's launched into the sun and lands in France. He joins a rock band made entirely of goats. Every scenario now starts from a place of cartoon logic. Cause and effect, optional, physics, flexible, continuity. Forget about it. This freed up the writer writers to just get weird with it. And in many cases, they did. This show's writers stopped asking, what would Johnny do in this situation? And instead started asking, what's the dumbest, funniest thing Johnny could do here, and how far can we push it? That opened the floodgates for one-off fantasy segments, musical numbers, hallucinations, mashups of genres, horror, sci-fi, spy thriller, cooking shows, entire episodes that felt like rejected Looney Tunes storyboards. And honestly, it worked more often than it should have. Because by this point, the audience wasn't here for coherence. They were here for chaotic laughs and cartoon spectacle. Let's talk about how dumb Johnny became. He began forgetting things he'd previously known. His own name, his address, how to use doors, whether or not he was wearing pants. He misinterpreted every situation, took every word literally, and often responded to basic instructions with confused blinking and vague flexing. It was like watching a golden retriever try to run a tech startup. And yet, he never stopped believing in himself. That unshakable ego, the thing that defined Johnny since the beginning, stayed intact even as everything else eroded. That's the heart of the character. No matter how dumb he gets, Johnny thinks he's got it handled. And that's comedy gold. Another reason Johnny got dumber. He started behaving like the audience. Kids don't follow plot logic. They follow impulse logic. What looks funny? What sounds funny? What happens if I do this? So Johnny's behavior began to mirror that. He touched everything. Screamed at nothing. Believed whatever he was told. Made the worst decision at every opportunity. It wasn't character regression. It was strategic cartoonification. And it made Johnny Bravo more accessible to younger viewers. You didn't have to get him. You just had to watch him go. At this point, Johnny stopped being a character within a story and started being the face of a brand. He was a logo, a punchline, a recognizable noise attached to a hairstyle. He didn't need arcs. He didn't need depth. He didn't even need memory. He just needed a scenario, a misunderstanding, and 11 minutes to explode it. This made reruns easier to rewatch. It made syndication cleaner. And it made Johnny a cartoon comfort food. There's a reason most long-running cartoons eventually crank up the weird. It's easier to write. It's easier to animate. It's funnier to most of the target audience. But you lose something in the trade. For Johnny Bravo, that trade was depth, subtlety, emotional stakes. You gained maximum chaos, infinite elasticity, an engine that could run forever or until Cartoon Network said we could. And for a while, it was the right call. This show thrived on this chaos. It kept Johnny on the air. It gave him a second life in reruns. But it also locked him into a role he could never grow out of. Ironically, by becoming less of a person, Johnny became more of a legend. He was no longer just a man stuck in the past. He was an idea. Loud, confident, harmless, always wrong. He paved the way for characters like Kronk, Joey Tribbiani in cartoon form, Andy Dwyer if he had biceps, Kronk again because let's face it, he's Johnny with an apron. In the era of lovable idiots, Johnny was the blueprint. And while his intelligence plummeted, his pop culture value skyrocketed. Every once in a while, a cartoon does something so unexpected, so delightfully unhinged, that it burns into your memory forever. For Johnny Bravo, those moments almost always involve guest stars. Real ones. Iconic ones. Sometimes fictional ones. All of them dropped into Johnny's world like cartoon asteroids, barely explained, never justified. And somehow, it always worked. This wasn't your average crossover episode. This was a recurring tradition of inviting celebrities into Johnny's absurd orbit and watching them either play themselves or something even weirder. Let's break down the most legendary guest appearances and why they became some of the most defining parts of Johnny Bravo's surreal charm. We need to start here. Because of all the people you'd expect to become a semi-recurring guest character on Johnny Bravo, Donny Osmond was not on the bingo card. And yet, he showed himself, and somehow became one of the funniest parts of the entire show. Let's rewind for a second. If you were born after 2000, you might not realize the sheer randomness of this. Donny Osmond was a teen pop star in the 1970s. He had a squeaky clean image, a famous sister, a variety show. He was basically the human version of vanilla frozen yogurt in a tuxedo. By the late 90s, Donny was in full self-parody mode, aware of his legacy, gently mocking it, but still clinging to his wholesome brand. So what did Johnny Bravo do? It threw him into a cartoon where he played a clingy, manic, hyper-positive version of himself, a man who wouldn't leave Johnny alone and somehow kept saving the day through the power of show tunes and relentless optimism. Donny Osmond played against type while still being himself. It was like watching Mr. Rogers crash Looney Tunes. And the writers knew how weird it was. They didn't try to justify it. They amplified the absurdity. Donny popping up in windows. Donny singing at inappropriate times. Donny completely unfazed by cartoon violence. He became Johnny's reluctant guardian angel, or maybe just a chaos gremlin in soft shoe heels. And honestly, he was hilarious. Next up, the patron saint of surreal cartoon cameos himself, Adam West. Yes, the original Batman. Yes, the guy who played himself in Family Guy as an aggressively unhinged mayor. But before that, he was already playing a version of himself in Johnny Bravo. Adam West didn't just appear in one episode. He made multiple appearances as a parody version of himself, complete with dramatic monologues, heroic one-liners, and zero situational awareness. In Johnny Bravo, he wasn't just a washed-up actor. He was a full-blown delusional superhero archetype, convinced he was still relevant, still powerful, still needed by the public. Johnny, naturally, idolized him. Wow, it's Batman. Or, some guy in a cape. The best part, Adam West was in on the joke. He leaned hard into his own reputation and delivered every line like it was a Shakespearean death scene being performed at a mall grand opening. It was campy, brilliant, and decades ahead of its time. Long before Family Guy turned Adam West into a walking non sequitur, Johnny Bravo gave us a version that blended 60s TV nostalgia, self-aware celebrity parody, and full cartoon madness. It was bold, it was specific, and it made Johnny Bravo feel like a crossover between Saturday morning TV and a midnight comedy sketch show. This wasn't just a guest spot. It was a blueprint for celebrity self-parody and animation. And then there's that episode. Yes, the one where Johnny Bravo meets Scooby-Doo. Officially, canonically, full crossover, full cast, full chaos. In the episode Bravo Doobie-Doo, Johnny teams up with Scooby, Shaggy, Fred, Daphne, Velma, to solve a mystery, a real one, in the full Scooby-Doo style. And somehow, it's not just a gag, it's a legit beat-for-beat Scooby-Doo episode with Johnny inserted into it like a bull in a ghost hunting china shop. Here's what's genius. Johnny, for once, is not the dumbest person in the room. He's also not the bravest, or the smartest, or even the loudest. And that contrast makes the episode work. The Scooby Gang plays it 100% straight. Johnny, meanwhile, acts like a tourist in a mystery novel. He flirts with Velma, gets terrified by fake ghosts, and tries to punch a haunted painting in the face. It's one of the best episodes of the series, and possibly one of the best Scooby-Doo crossovers of all time. These cameos weren't just gimmicks. They expanded the universe, broke the fourth wall, added absurdity without losing charm, showed that Johnny Bravo didn't take itself too seriously, let celebrities be weird in ways they couldn't on live TV. They also proved that the show had reach. It was goofy enough to host Donny Osmond and sincere enough for Adam West to monologue in it. And that blend of sincerity and stupidity, that's the soul of Johnny Bravo. Guest star parody became a major trend in animated shows that followed. The Fairly Odd Parents, Family Guy, Robot Chicken, The Simpsons, Adventure Time. But Johnny Bravo was there early, showing that you could blend nostalgia, parody, and sincere homage in the same 11-minute package. All without ever explaining why Donny Osmond just emerged from your laundry basket holding a pan flute. Daria Morgendorffer never set out to be iconic. She didn't ask to be a role model. She didn't want your admiration or your rebellion or your Etsy sticker orders. She just wanted people to stop being so ridiculous all the time. But the irony, in rolling her eyes at the world, she accidentally gave a generation permission to open theirs. So now, as the credits roll on, is it college yet? We ask, what did this show leave behind? Let's start with the obvious, the voice. Daria's voice is unmistakable. Deadpan. Dry. Surgical. Every line is a scalpel. No wasted words. No fake emotion. But what made her voice powerful wasn't the monotone. It was the precision. She said what no one else would. She said what you thought, but couldn't articulate. And somehow, she made it funny. But more than that, she made it safe to feel jaded. To question things. To be unimpressed. Daria didn't encourage nihilism. It encouraged discernment. It said, no, you're not the problem for seeing the cracks in the system. Yes, you're allowed to be tired. Yes, you're allowed to be sharp. No, you don't have to fake a smile. That mattered. Especially in a time when teen media was loud, sparkly, moralistic, and aggressively peppy. Daria walked in wearing combat boots and said, I'd rather be alone than fake. And a lot of us needed that. Let's talk about the quiet heroes. Because Daria wasn't just a one-woman show. Its strength was in its ensemble. Jane Lane showed us what it meant to pursue creativity without needing approval. To choose expression over attention. To stay weird even when you could pass for normal. Quinn Morgendorfer taught us that being underestimated can be a superpower. That you can evolve without announcing it. That growth doesn't have to be dramatic, it just has to be real. Jodie Landon gave voice to those balancing 100 expectations in silence. Navigating pressure with grace that was mistaken for ease. Working twice as hard to be half as heard. Even Jake and Helen, for all their dysfunction, taught us something. That adults don't always have it together. That love can be messy and flawed and still worth showing up for. And the world of Daria. It was a parody of the suburbs. But it was also a portrait. Of every hallway you've walked down feeling too awake. Of every class you sat through wondering, is this really it? Of every person who talked too loud, laughed too hard, and never noticed you watching. Daria didn't change the landscape overnight. It didn't sell merch or launch a billion-dollar franchise. But it stuck. Because it saw us. Not the version we perform. But the one who sits quietly in the back of the room. Judging. Hoping. Enduring. So where are these characters now? We don't know. And that's the beauty of it. This show never gave us a 10 years later epilogue. It left us with possibility. Which is more honest. Maybe Daria became a writer. Maybe she teaches college lit. Maybe she quit it all and opened a bookstore in the desert. Whatever she's doing, she's still asking hard questions. Still seeing through the noise. Still giving us permission to think deeper, speak sharper, and feel more privately. And you made it through 3 hours of that sweet, sick, sad world. You've ridden the bus routes of Lawndale. You sat through the self-esteem classes. You watched friends fall apart and patch themselves back together. And maybe, just maybe, something in you shifted, too. You're a little older. A little more awake. Still tired, but in a more intentional way. And that's enough. That's all Daria ever wanted for you. So as the tape slows to a stop, here's what you can take with you. It's okay to not be impressed. It's okay to protect your energy. It's okay to outgrow people, gently. It's okay to be the smartest person in the room and still feel lost. And it's okay to leave. Even if you're scared of where you're going. Because the road always stretches. The map isn't finished. And sometimes, the next turn isn't marked, but it's yours anyway. You've been listening to Lore FM. Thanks for drifting with us through Lawndale. The seat's always open. The tape's always rolling. And the next story is just up ahead. Here's the thing about Johnny Bravo. You don't have to remember the episodes. You don't have to know who made it, when it aired, or how many seasons it ran. All you need is the hair, the pose, the wool mama, and boom, instant recognition. Johnny Bravo isn't just a cartoon anymore. He's a meme archetype, a digital shorthand for everything from overconfidence to oblivious thirst. A reaction image wrapped in 200 pounds of muscle, a black t-shirt, and one brain cell doing its best. Let's talk about how Johnny Bravo, a show that premiered in 1997, became a cultural constant in meme culture, especially in the 2010s and beyond. In the early days of Tumblr, Twitter, Reddit, and later TikTok, there was one phrase that popped up over and over. Johnny Bravo walked so the himbos of today could run. And they weren't wrong. Because before Kronk, before Joey Tribbiani's redemption arc, before TikTok thirst traps leaned into being cute, dumb, and emotionally supportive, there was Johnny. Except he wasn't emotionally supportive. He was just really dumb and really confident. And that combination, it's meme gold. Over the years, Johnny has become the template for all sorts of meme formats. Let's break down a few. 1. The sliding into DMs meme. Image, Johnny flexing or leaning on a wall. Text, when you message her hey mama, cool face emoji, and she blocks you in 0.3 seconds. 2. The overconfident male meme. Image, Johnny posing in the mirror. Text, me, also me, I should totally start a podcast. 3. The failure with women reaction. Image, Johnny getting punched. Text, when she says she likes confident guys but not that confident. 4. The he tries, okay. Meme. Image, Johnny with a flower. Text, me showing up to her house uninvited but with vibes, okay emoji. These aren't just nostalgic references. They're ongoing reinterpretations of Johnny's character in a new, digital language. And every time one of these memes goes viral, a new generation of people goes, wait, who is this guy? Himbo wasn't a common term when Johnny Bravo aired. But now, it's a full-blown identity on social media. Definition. A himbo is a handsome, well-meaning man who is kind-hearted, respectful, and dumb as a brick. Think. Kronk. Jason Mendoza. Thor, but post-Ragnarok. Now, was Johnny Bravo a true himbo? Well, no. He wasn't exactly kind or respectful. But he tried. And he meant well. Which makes him proto-himbo, the blueprint before the blueprint. His entire existence screamed, I don't understand women, but I love women. And if I just flex enough, it'll all work out. That delusion, that sincerity, it made him the perfect reference point for a culture that now celebrates that archetype ironically and sincerely at the same time. On TikTok, Johnny Bravo lives again, in edit compilations, thirst trap parodies, himbo deep dives, out of context Johnny Bravo accounts, duets with Johnny's voice clips. He's even shown up in fitness influencers memes where gym brothers post their mirror selfies next to Johnny with the caption, Spirit Animal. Or better yet, Johnny Bravo taught me everything I know. Still single though. There's a kind of meta-humor at play here. Everyone knows Johnny's approach is flawed, but they also admire how hard he commits to the bit. That's what keeps him relevant. Gen Z meme culture thrives on two things. Irony layered over sincerity. Characters who are self-aware, or so unaware that they become self-aware by accident. Johnny Bravo fits this perfectly. He's the guy who shows up overdressed, gets rejected, says well mama anyway, then dances like no one's watching. He's so far removed from success that his confidence becomes a performance art piece. And meme culture loves that. There's also the aesthetic factor. Johnny Bravo's design is instantly recognizable, visually bold, easy to Photoshop, funny in silhouette. He looks great in a 4-panel comic, as a reaction GIF, as a mashup meme. People use him like a digital sticker. He doesn't need context. He is the context. That's rare and powerful. Let's talk about what meme culture does best. Reclaiming old media. Johnny Bravo was once seen as a relic, a gimmick, a show for gym brothers with bad taste in women. But now, he's camp, he's satire, he's a tragic icon of misunderstood confidence. He's the guy who was just trying his best, and failing forward, one flex at a time. Meme culture turned Johnny into a symbol of male delusion, a joke about romantic failure, a surprisingly sweet character under layers of absurdity, all without changing a single frame. Johnny Bravo memes keep coming back because they're timeless. are visually funny. They play on universal themes such as rejection, confidence, denial. They hit different when you're older and realize you might be Johnny. That last point is the twist. As a kid, you laughed at Johnny. As an adult, you laugh with a touch of horrified recognition. Oh no, I've said that exact thing before. Oh no, I've tried that move. Oh no, am I the Bravo? That's when the meme hits the hardest. When Johnny Bravo first aired in 1997, it was a weird little experiment. One of the first big swings from the newly launched Cartoon Network. 1 part Elvis parody, 2 parts social satire, and a whole load of flexing. But despite the short original run of its smartest season, and despite the fact that later seasons often went full chaos mode, Johnny Bravo didn't fade away like so many other late 90s tunes. In fact, over time, he got louder. Not in new episodes, but in reruns, in merchandise, in clip compilations, in nostalgia-core playlists, fashion drops, and retro-core TikToks. Let's explore how a show that never cracked the top 5 of its era became an icon of cartoon nostalgia culture. If you grew up watching Cartoon Network in the early 2000s, odds are Johnny Bravo was part of your weekday routine. Even after production slowed, reruns were constant. Early mornings, after-school hours, late-night blocks, paired with Dexter's Lab, Cal, and Chicken, Ed, and Eddie. Johnny became part of the cartoon ecosystem, a default member of the retro Cartoon Network lineup. You didn't always seek him out, but there he was, flexing between cereal commercials. And over time, that repetition turned him into comfort food. He was always there. He never changed, and that made him timeless. You wouldn't think a show with no real story arcs and no moral center would produce lasting merchandise. But Johnny Bravo broke the rules, again. Even after the show ended, the character lived on through. T-shirts at Hot Topic and Spencer's. Target pajama sets in early 2000s bold block fonts. Limited Funko Pop drops. Convention enamel pins. Bootleg international stickers and backpacks. And as early 2000s fashion came back around, Johnny Bravo became a style icon. He fit perfectly into Y2K aesthetic, retro cartoon core, hyper-ironic Gen Z fits, vintage masculinity TikTok trend mashups. He became a brand, not just a cartoon. And merch was the gateway drug. Let's give credit where it's due. The YouTube edit era of the late 2000s and early 2010s helped resurrect Johnny Bravo. People began uploading out-of-context Johnny Bravo compilations. Johnny Bravo being a himbo for 7 minutes straight. Every time Johnny gets rejected. Side-by-side comparisons of Season 1 versus Season 4. These clips introduced Johnny to audiences who'd never watched full episodes and probably never would. But the format worked. Johnny's jokes were quick. The animation was clean. And the visual comedy, timeless. You didn't need backstory. Just sunglasses, confidence, and a crash sound effect. In the 2020s, Johnny became a piece of digital nostalgic currency. He wasn't just remembered. He was recontextualized. He became the symbol of every gym bro who means well but lives in a bubble. The stand-in for emotionally unavailable exes. The reaction face for every overconfident, underqualified job application. The energy source of every TikTok thirst trap parody. He was funny because he failed, but comforting because he tried. And that's nostalgia's sweet spot. We remember Johnny not for how good he was, but for how consistent he was. Here's the wild part. Johnny Bravo was doing brand synergy before that was even a term. He was crossed over with Scooby-Doo, guest starring real celebrities, doing musical numbers, PSA parodies, and genre episodes, getting featured in CN bumpers alongside other tunes, part of video game promos and branded flash games on CartoonNetwork.com. He was already functioning like an animated brand mascot, not just a character. So when nostalgia became a marketable emotion in the 2010s, Johnny fit perfectly. You didn't need to explain him. You just needed the sunglasses and a catchphrase. Let's face it, Johnny Bravo was never supposed to last. It was a weird pitch, a short season, an animation style that looked like clip art, A main character who never learned. But the show did something rare. It created a character who didn't need the show to survive. Johnny Bravo exists in meme formats, retro t-shirts, Twitter bios, YouTube clip dumps, Spotify playlists labeled cartoons you fell asleep to in 2004, Cartoon Man Crush listicles, TikToks with the caption Johnny Bravo energy, saluting face emoji. He snuck into culture sideways and stayed there. In a way, Johnny Bravo's biggest flex isn't his biceps, it's his resilience. He never got a reboot, never had a feature film, never spawned a cinematic universe. And yet, he's still here. Because nostalgia doesn't just bring back memories, it reevaluates them. And in that reevaluation, Johnny Bravo went from cringe guy who hits on women to cringe guy who thinks he's hot, but we all know he's just lonely and needs a hug. He became relatable in hindsight, and that made him iconic. Let's be honest. If someone pitched Johnny Bravo today, a muscle-bound dude in sunglasses who spends every episode getting rejected, flexing in mirrors, and saying, well mama, it probably wouldn't get past the first meeting. It breaks every modern animation rule. No character growth. No serialized storytelling. No clear theme. No emotional depth. A protagonist who, on paper, is a cautionary tale wrapped in pomade. And yet, Johnny Bravo still works. Not just as a nostalgia meme. Not just as a cartoon artifact. But as something that still lands years after its original run. Let's talk about why. Johnny Bravo's episodes are short, modular, self-contained, visually punchy, easy to jump into mid-scene, and designed to loop like cartoon YouTube shorts before that was a thing. You don't need to follow a plot. You don't need a backstory. Every episode is basically Johnny wants something, Johnny messes up something, explodes, Johnny shrugs, roll credits. It's comfort viewing with a dumbbell in one hand and a hairbrush in the other. And that structure makes Johnny infinitely rewatchable. Johnny is built to deliver one thing, jokes. Every part of him is a setup for a punchline. The way he walks, the way he talks, his complete lack of self-awareness, his emotional resilience, his cartoon physics immunity to failure. And because the world around him changes every episode, but he doesn't, you always know what kind of comedy you're getting. He's the cartoon version of a sitcom character who never grows, never learns, and somehow gets funnier the more he spirals. Johnny is funny because he never evolves, and somehow that makes him feel consistent in an entertainment landscape that's always chasing the next twist. A lot of people ask, would Johnny Bravo be canceled today? Maybe, but only by people who didn't actually watch the show. Because here's the deal. Johnny is never the good guy. He's not praised. He's not rewarded. He's not held up as something to emulate. The whole point of the show is that Johnny fails. Constantly. Spectacularly. Often violently. Every character around him sees through him, rejects him, laughs at him, or treats him like a mildly annoying chihuahua in sunglasses. He's not celebrated, he's clowned. And that's what keeps the show from aging like milk. It's not toxic masculinity, the cartoon. It's toxic masculinity, the roast. And that distinction makes all the difference. Here's where it gets weird. For all his flaws, Johnny Bravo is weirdly admirable. He gets rejected 100% of the time, is humiliated in every episode, lives with his mom, is mocked by small children, doesn't have a job or hobbies or measurable intelligence. And still, he gets up, he combs his hair, he flexes, he goes outside, he tries. He believes in himself, no matter how many signs say he shouldn't. And in a world where self-esteem is often tied to performance, success, or validation, that kind of unshakable confidence is oddly refreshing. Is it delusional? Yes. Is it funny? Absolutely. But is it relatable? Weirdly. Yeah. Let's be real. The Johnny Bravo art style, still a banger. Bold lines. Flat colors, iconic silhouettes, backgrounds that look like mid-century diner menus, and Johnny himself, basically a living muscle emoji. It's a clean, cartoon-friendly design that aged surprisingly well. Easy to meme, easy to animate, easy to adapt to modern edits and merge. He looks amazing in Vaporwave. He belongs on retro-core Instagram feeds. He fits right into mashup edits alongside Scooby-Doo, Sailor Moon, or SpongeBob. He wasn't designed for the digital age, but somehow he thrives in it. In the TikTok era, Johnny Bravo is built for clips. You can drop him into a 15-second flex fail, a thirst trap parody, a doofy motivational speech remix, a cartoon remix about rejection, a meme about delusional men in low-rise jeans. And it lands every time. Why? Because his comedic timing, exaggerated movements, and ridiculous quotes feel modern, even though they were made 20 plus years ago. Johnny Bravo was doing TikTok humor before TikTok existed. This one might surprise you, but Johnny Bravo is a safe space for failing. He fails at love, at logic, at basic motor function, at reading social cues, at existing in society. And yet, he's still here. He's not bitter. He's not mean. He just shrugs, resets, and tries again. In a world that often demands perfection, Johnny Bravo is a cartoon that says, hey, you can mess up. You can look dumb. You can get rejected. But you're still allowed to wake up tomorrow, strike a pose, and say, let's try again, baby. And that's kinda beautiful. Johnny Bravo wasn't supposed to last. He was a parody, a punchline, a short season oddity. But in the end, he became a meme, a mascot, a weird little cartoon hero for the overconfident, the underqualified, and the endlessly rejected. He's not smart. He's not successful. He's not even functional. But he's iconic. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes him timeless. The sitcom hero used to be aspirational. In the 80s and early 90s, it was. Cliff Huxtable, stable dad, successful professional, life under control. Uncle Phil, wise, authoritative, always 2 steps ahead of everyone. Tim the Toolman Taylor, buffoonish, yes, but always right in the end. Then something shifted. By the late 90s and early 2000s, a new kind of character started taking over. Coolest, underachieving, overconfident, emotionally stunted, but somehow still lovable. Sound familiar? That's right. Johnny Bravo predicted the rise of the modern lovable loser long before it became a sitcom standard. Let's connect the dots. Here's a list of characters who, if you squint hard enough, look like they could all be distant cousins of Johnny Bravo. Homer Simpson, Joey Tribbiani from the sitcom Friends, Michael Scott from The Office, Andy Dwyer from Parks and Recreation, Jake Peralta from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but chaos-coded, Phil Dunphy from Modern Family, Ted Mosby from How I Met Your Mother during his worst arcs, Nick Miller from New Girl, Johnny Bravo but animated, pre-social media, and extra shiny. All of these characters are emotionally stunted, think they're more charming than they are, often derail social situations, live in their own logic, get away with it because they're enduring underneath the chaos. Johnny Bravo wasn't inspired by this trend. He preceded it. The magic of Johnny is that he wasn't just a loser. He was the self-aware archetype of one. He knew he was the star of his own show. He posed for the camera. He delivered catchphrases like sitcom one-liners. He had a stage mom. He wore the same outfit every day. He had no arc, and that was the arc. Sound familiar? That's basically half the TV guys we know today. Johnny Bravo was the sitcom guy without the emotional growth. The punchline is the protagonist. A walking he means well wrapped in cologne and protein powder. And unlike some of today's sitcom leads, he didn't hurt people. He didn't have dark secrets. He just failed. Consistently. Hilariously. Harmlessly. Why do we love characters like Johnny Bravo? Because they're predictable, consistent, and emotionally simple. In a world where everyone's overthinking everything, Johnny never thinks at all. He's not struggling with existential dread. He's not haunted by past traumas. He's not trying to become a better man. He's just a guy with sunglasses, a plan, but a bad one, and absolutely zero shame. And somehow, that's soothing. Especially in comedy, where the biggest laughs often come from characters who just refuse to grow up. Modern sitcoms love to tease arcs. They'll give you a glimpse of maturity, a hint at backstory, a single tear during a Christmas episode. Then, back to square one. Johnny doesn't bother. He starts dumb. He ends dumb. He walks into the episode like a king. He leaves like a doormat. And he's fine with that. In a weird way, Johnny Bravo is purer than his sitcom descendants. Because he never pretends to change. And honestly, that's a vibe. Let's check the boxes. Tries hard. Every episode. Fails upward. Somehow, yes. Wears the same outfit forever. Absolutely. Surrounded by smarter people. Constantly. Emotionally bulletproof. Like a himbo Terminator. Learned a lesson. Never. Not once. Still lovable. Unreasonably so. He fits the modern sitcom formula perfectly. Before it was the formula. No. But also, maybe, more likely, Johnny was the logical bridge between Looney Tunes chaos and post-Seinfeld character design. He existed during a transitional moment in TV history. Cartoons were getting weirder. Sitcoms were getting messier. Characters were becoming more flawed. And Johnny Bravo, cartoon himbo extraordinaire, accidentally became a prototype. He was a loser, a legend, a flex gone wrong, a man with no plan but lots of hair gel. And that's the sitcom guy formula in a nutshell. By every measurable metric, Johnny Bravo shouldn't have endured. It wasn't the most popular cartoon of its era. It didn't have the merchandise empire of Pokemon or Powerpuff Girls. It didn't win a bunch of Emmys. And it never got rebooted or reimagined for the big screen. But somehow, Johnny Bravo still matters. He's lived on longer than most shows from his time. He's been repackaged as a meme, a mascot, a fashion icon, a commentary, and a comfort character. He's gone from forgotten flex bro to postmodern himbo legend. Let's talk about why Johnny Bravo still gets the last laugh, even if the show's been off the air for years. At face value, Johnny Bravo is a one-joke cartoon. Big guy hits on women gets rejected repeat. And yet, that formula became more than the sum of its parts. Because underneath that cycle was a character so boldly consistent, so ridiculously self-unaware, so deeply unserious, that he became eternal. Johnny didn't need a complex backstory. He didn't need to grow. He was a cartoon about trying and failing, again and again, with style. And that simplicity aged better than you'd think. Johnny Bravo stopped being just a cartoon somewhere around 2010. That's when clip culture, Tumblr memes, and ironic fan edits started reframing him as the OG himbo, the face of unearned confidence, a mascot for gym brothers with hearts of gold, a way to lovingly mock male delusion. He became symbolic, a punchline with purpose. People started using Johnny as a reference in dating advice videos, a metaphor for harmless ego, a soft lens for their own awkward pasts. He was no longer just a character in a cartoon. He was a cultural avatar. Let's break this down. Late 90s, early 2000s, original show run plus reruns equals childhood comfort food. 2010s, rise of nostalgia core plus YouTube edits equals ironic rediscovery. 2020s, meme boom plus Gen Z internet humor equals full-on Johnny Bravo renaissance. This is textbook nostalgia curve behavior. Childhood icon. Forgotten phase. Ironic meme. Sincere comeback. Comfort media. Johnny nailed every stage. And because he was never overly complicated, he was easy to plug into each new context. Johnny also became unexpectedly marketable. He's shown up in Junior collections, streetwear capsules, retro cartoon art prints, Hot Topic reboots, thirst trap parody TikToks, unofficial motivational posters such as Flex First, Cry Later. He's even become part of cosplay culture, not as a serious costume, but as a comedy bit. At conventions, you'll find shirtless dudes in shades and fake pompadours, gender-bent Johnny Bravos, entire squads doing Well Mama in unison. He's not just worn, he's performed. That's icon energy. Think about it. We live in an era of fake gurus, alpha influencers, and guys who think one podcast episode makes them a philosopher. We've got TikTok life coaches with no credentials and fitness brothers who can't spell protein. We've got endless confidence with no content behind it. Johnny Bravo predicted all of this. He's a walking satire of male confidence without substance. The difference? He's funny, he's self-contained, and he doesn't hurt anyone. In fact, he gets hurt constantly, and he never gives up. Let's call it what it is. Johnny Bravo is about failing gracefully. He gets rejected, tossed, humiliated, suplexed, mocked, and forgotten. And yet, he keeps going. With style, with commitment, with perfectly styled hair. In a world where perfection is curated, filtered, and expected. Johnny is raw, honest, ridiculous. He doesn't win, but he never quits. And that's why he sticks. Some cartoons get remembered for their stories, their world building, their emotional arcs. Johnny Bravo, he's remembered for one thing. Well, mama. But that line, dumb as it is, carries weight now. It's a timestamp, a callback, a meme, a comfort catchphrase. A symbol of when cartoons were allowed to be weird and shameless and fun. Johnny Bravo never needed to evolve. He just needed to survive. And somehow, he did. Still flexing, still losing, still iconic. Let's start with a confession. We love watching characters fail. Not maliciously, not in a mean-spirited way, but in a way that makes us think, oh, I've done that. Maybe not that exact thing. But, yeah, characters who never learn are the secret engine of modern comedy. They say the wrong thing, make the same mistakes, repeat the same cycle, learn nothing from it, and still walk back in the next day like they got it all figured out. And Johnny Bravo, he's the poster child for that type of character, especially in animation. Let's explore why these kinds of characters stick with us, why we root for them. And why, even when they don't grow, we do. In storytelling, we're often taught that good characters need arcs, change, growth, lessons. But some characters don't. They're static by design. They exist in a loop. Every episode resets. Every failure is wiped clean. Every opportunity for self-reflection is bulldozed by a catchphrase or a pratfall. That should make them boring. But instead, it makes them comforting, because in a chaotic world, they are predictable chaos. Characters like Johnny Bravo tap into a specific kind of viewer response. I don't want to fix this character. I just want to watch them flail. It's a mix of cringe comedy, relatability, safe dysfunction. You're not worried about Johnny hurting anyone. You're not expecting him to deliver a monologue about his childhood trauma. You're just watching a guy get rejected by a librarian and then chase an ice cream truck off a cliff. It's cathartic. It's dumb. It's safe. And sometimes, that's what people need. Live-action sitcoms can struggle with this. Eventually, characters like Michael Scott, George Costanza, Dennis Reynolds reach a point where their lack of growth starts to feel frustrating or gross. But in animation, the rules are looser. Animated characters are ageless, unchanging, immune to consequences, born to be looped. And that means we can laugh at them forever without asking, when is this guy going to get it together? Because the answer is never. And that's the point. Johnny Bravo isn't alone in this cartoon purgatory of permanent failure. He's got company. Homer Simpson, dozens of jobs, zero growth. Patrick Starr, blissfully unaware since day one. Rick Sanchez, learns everything, changes nothing. Eric Cartman, too evil to evolve. Bugs Bunny, already perfect, already chaotic. Tom has literally never won. Ed can't even spell growth. What makes them compelling isn't change. It's consistency. They're who they are. Always. And that's oddly soothing. Johnny Bravo doesn't win. Ever. He gets rejected. Gets punched. Gets lost. Gets mistaken for furniture. Gets stumped by a talking raccoon once. But he never wallows. He never spirals. He never broods. He just flexes and says, "She must be allergic to awesome." That's resilience, baby. And that kind of cheerful failure. It's inspiring in a strange way. He's proof that you can fail constantly. Be deeply uncool. Have no plan, no job, no clue. And still believe in yourself enough to show up again tomorrow. That's not a character flaw. That's a survival skill. The moment Johnny Bravo learns a lesson, the magic's gone. Because we're not watching him to grow. We're watching him to spin his wheels confidently. Johnny is like a sitcom rerun you've seen 20 times. You don't want a plot twist. You want the comfort of the familiar. Johnny sees a girl. Johnny strikes a pose. Johnny gets suplexed. Johnny blames the wind. Roll credits. Every time he doesn't change, it reminds us that some things don't have to. And maybe that's okay. Ironically, characters like Johnny often reveal more about us than about themselves. We project our insecurities, our fears of rejection, our desire to be unbothered, our fantasies of trying without caring about failing. Johnny's lack of growth is our own escape hatch. In him, we see what we fear, what we envy, what we need. He doesn't evolve, but we do as we laugh, flinch, cringe, and feel weirdly seen. Johnny Bravo will never win, never get the girl, never understand boundaries, never pay rent, but he'll always show up, strike a pose, say something dumb, get rejected, and try again. He is not the hero we want. He is not the role model we need, but he is the fool we deserve. And in a world obsessed with progress, arcs, and redemption, sometimes we just need a cartoon character who never learns a damn thing. And that's why we'll keep watching him fail forever. Let's be clear. Johnny Bravo wasn't just a himbo. He was the prototype, the alpha himbo, the base model, the big bang of animated dumb and pretty energy. But he wasn't the only one. Over time, cartoons gave us more himbos, kinder, softer, sometimes smarter, but always big-hearted and low-brained. The himbo evolved. And to understand how Johnny Bravo became the ancient fossil beneath today's himbo kingdom, we need to talk about what a himbo really is, how Johnny paved the way, and why characters like Kronk became the upgraded software. Let's start with a proper definition. Brain emoji. What is a himbo? A himbo, in internet taxonomy, is a man who is hot, kind, and dumb in that order. More specifically, he's big and strong, emotionally soft, extremely loyal, morally pure, intellectually challenged, not malicious, just clueless. If a golden retriever became a gym trainer and held the door open for strangers, that's your guy. Think Kronk, Tadashi, Andy Dwyer, Bolin, Maui, Joey Tribbiani. The himbo is lovable, not threatening, attractive but safe, a little dumb but never mean. So, where does Johnny fit in? Let's check the list. Hot, obviously strong, comically kind, well, dumb, catastrophically loyal, to himself emotionally supportive, questionable non-toxic. Johnny has the looks. He has the muscles. He has the intelligence of a decorative shampoo bottle. But where he falls short of the modern himbo ideal is this. He's not that kind. Not unkind, but not selfless either. He's not a helper. He's not a nurturer. He's not out here supporting women. He's usually interrupting them mid-sentence. But back in the late 90s, Johnny was still revolutionary. because he reframed macho masculinity as funny, flawed, and soft around the edges, even if he wasn't aware of it. That was the first step. When The Emperor's New Groove hit in 2000, it gave us a character who basically said, okay, let's take Johnny Bravo, but make him sweet. Kronk is built like a linebacker, loyal to a fault, great with animals, terrible at critical thinking, a short order cook with a heart of gold, a guy who talks to squirrels and doesn't think that's weird. He is the himbo ideal. Hot, wholesome, helpful. He cooks, he babysits, he volunteers, he cries at movies. He talks to his inner shoulder angels like they're old roommates. He took Johnny's physical template and added emotional intelligence and kindness. And that combo, it became the gold standard for modern himbos. Let's give Johnny credit. Before Kronk, before Bolin, before Chris Hemsworth turned Thor into a lovable idiot, Johnny Bravo softened the macho image. He was the first big dumb guy who wasn't a villain. A rejection of the cold, stoic action hero. A man who cried, screamed, flirted badly, and posed even worse. He made being manly look ridiculous, and by doing so, made room for more gentle masculinity in media. He didn't succeed. He didn't learn. But he showed us what a non-threatening muscle guy could look like. And once that door opened, the himbo evolution took off. Johnny Bravo from 1997, the proto-himbo. Looks the part, lacks the heart. All confidence, no EQ. The joke is that he fails. Kronk from 2000, the upgrade. Looks the part, has the heart. Helpful, domestic, loyal. The joke is that he's too nice to be a henchman. Modern himbos from 2000 tends to present more emotional range, often used to contrast toxic masculinity. Joke becomes admiration plus irony. Sometimes too self-aware. See, ironic TikTok himbos. The progression is clear. Dumb but dumb, kind, and weirdly insightful. Johnny may have started the party, but the himbos that followed brought snacks, feelings, and a willingness to cry about dogs. There's a reason the himbo rose when he did, in a media landscape full of brooding anti-heroes, emotionally unavailable geniuses, snarky nice guys who feel entitled to love. The himbo offered a third option. A man who means well, even when he doesn't get it. He's vulnerable. He's not manipulative. He's not angling for attention. He just wants to lift things and be light. And Johnny, in his earliest form, hinted at this need. He wasn't there yet, but he made space for it to happen. Even if Johnny doesn't fit the full mold, his DNA lives on in. Kronk, Bolin, Maui, Thor from Ragnarok onward, Fix-It Felix from Wreck-It Ralph, Kristoff from Frozen, Andy Dwyer, King Shark from Harley Quinn. Basically any muscular man who says wait, what? A lot. He helped make muscle plus stupidity plus softness equals not a punchline, but a genre. He walks so others could stumble adorably. Let's talk about a phrase that didn't exist when Johnny Bravo first aired. Toxic masculinity. In 1997, most people weren't throwing that term around. The internet hadn't memed it. Pop culture hadn't dissected it. And animated shows certainly weren't using it as a framework for writing their main character. But in hindsight, that's exactly what Johnny Bravo looks like. A man who never listens, hits on every woman he sees, is obsessed with muscles, mirrors, and one-liners, and can't emotionally connect with anything not covered in hair gel. It's easy to look back and go, yikes, this aged poorly. But hold up, because the more you rewatch, the more it becomes clear. Johnny Bravo wasn't promoting toxic masculinity. He was roasting it, and whether it meant to or not, Johnny Bravo became one of the earliest mainstream cartoons to hold a funhouse mirror up to male ego and laugh. Here's the secret sauce. Johnny Bravo is not a celebration of manhood. He's a parody of everything society told men to be in the 80s and early 90s. Ripped, cool, cocky, womanizing, emotionally closed, always confident, never vulnerable. He's like an action hero who got left behind at the gym and just kept lifting until he forgot his own name. And the show knows this. That's why. He never gets the girl. He's constantly mocked. Small children outwit him. His own mother low-key pities him. Everyone in the show sees him for what he is. He's a walking relic, and the show treats him like one. Johnny isn't funny because he's cool. He's funny because he's not. Every time he tries to flirt, he fails. Every time he flexes, someone rolls their eyes. Every time he acts macho, he gets cartoon karate chopped into a wall. If this show were glorifying his behavior, he'd be rewarded for it. Instead, he's punished every single time. That's not accidental. That's the joke. Satire in kids' animation is tricky. It can't be preachy. It can't be subtle to the point of invisibility. And it definitely can't break the tone of the show. Johnny Bravo pulls it off by making the satire loud, obvious, and physical. Using slapstick to highlight absurd behavior. Putting Johnny in a world where everyone else is normal. It's not just Johnny that's exaggerated, it's the response to Johnny that sells the joke. When a cartoon grandma beats him up with a purse, it's not just a gag. It's a rejection of his entire persona. And we laugh because we agree with the world that keeps dunking on him. Let's not go overboard. Johnny Bravo wasn't pushing radical gender discourse. It wasn't unpacking patriarchy in an 11-minute format. But it was making fun of obnoxious male entitlement. Surface-level masculinity. Pick-up artist behavior before that phrase even existed. And it did it in a way that kids found funny, adults could side-eye with amusement, and future audiences could revisit and go, "Oh wow, this guy is every cringe DM I've ever gotten, but in cartoon form." Here's the part that's weirdly genius. Johnny Bravo feels like he was written for 2023 meme culture, but he wasn't. He just accidentally aged into it. Why? Because toxic masculinity didn't go away. It just changed platforms. Johnny Bravo looks like your gym bro mutual who reposts grindset quotes. That guy on Tinder whose bio says no drama, just vibes but messages you up at 2 a.m. This self-proclaimed alpha who thinks rejection is a glitch in the simulation. He's dated. He's basic. And the show treats him like exactly that. So while the world moved on, Johnny stayed locked in his cartoon time capsule and became a perfect parody all over again. There are shows that accidentally reflect bad behavior, and then there are shows that hold the mirror up and say, "Yeah, don't be this." Johnny Bravo is the second type, even if you didn't realize it at the time. Because satire doesn't always look like satire when it's animated, brightly colored, and yelling "Well mama" every 2 minutes. But if you look at the structure, the responses, the framing, the ratio of Johnny's confidence to his actual success rate, it's clear. This is not a model for manhood. It's a cautionary cartoon. In a post-#MeToo world, people re-examined a lot of media. Some shows got tossed in the age like milk bin. Others were unexpectedly insightful. Johnny Bravo ended up in a weird third category. Okay, this is dumb, but wait, was this secretly brilliant? Because it turns out, a cartoon that constantly mocks a clueless man who refuses to take no for an answer, who fails spectacularly every time, and who is consistently humbled by the people around him. That's not promoting toxic masculinity. That's dismantling it with jokes, pratfalls, and a flex that always ends in failure. Johnny Bravo is outdated. But that's the point. He's a guy stuck in his own era, clinging to muscles, moves, and mindsets that don't work anymore, if they ever did. A guy who doesn't change because he can't see why he should. And the world around him knows it. So when we laugh at Johnny Bravo, we're not laughing with him. We're laughing at male ego, denial, self-importance, and the hilarious tragedy of never evolving. And the more time passes, the more that laughter starts to feel like a collective sigh of recognition. Because we've all met a Johnny. We've all been a little Johnny. And we've all, hopefully, learned what he never will. Johnny Bravo didn't know he was built for the future. But he was. While the internet was still dialing up, Bravo was already doing freeze-frame poses, oversized reaction faces, one-liner punch-ins, over-the-top flailing, and catchphrases so short they practically begged to be meme captions. He was a living gift before gifs were a thing. And once the internet caught up, Johnny didn't need a reboot. He just needed a screenshot and a caption. Let's break down how Johnny Bravo became a perfect reaction meme machine, and how that legacy may be his most enduring contribution to digital culture. You've seen them. Johnny leaning on a wall with sunglasses equals when she leaves you on read but you're still chill about it, cool face emoji. Johnny getting punched into orbit equals me after sending you up at 2 a.m. Johnny crying into a mirror equals me hyping myself up after getting ghosted by someone I never even met. Johnny holding flowers with the coolest smile equals when you show up uninvited but emotionally available. Johnny flexing for no one equals when nobody asked but you're looking good anyway. Each one is visually clear, instantly recognizable, emotionally exaggerated, and absurdly meme-friendly. The Bravo style is all reaction, all the time. He's the emoji and the punchline. Johnny's entire character model was designed around overreaction. He doesn't just talk, he performs. He doesn't just walk, he struts, spins, crashes, flails, and freezes mid-pose like a mannequin in a wind tunnel. His face cycles through smug, desperate, distracted, shattered, confused, overconfident, and tragically optimistic, all in the span of a single scene. In that range, it's priming content. Let's break down what makes a Johnny Bravo meme work. Bold silhouette, instantly recognizable, even at low resolution. Cartoon exaggeration, no subtlety equals easy emotion detection. Color blocking, visually pops in timelines and stories. Predictable emotion dash, you know the setup before the caption even hits. Built-in irony, he's failing, but with confidence. He's like an action figure that thinks it's in a rom-com, but it's actually in a rejection montage. And meme culture loves that kind of delusion. Across platforms, Johnny evolved. Tumblr from 2012 to 2016, reaction stills, Johnny Bravo feminism parody edits, and ironic praise for being the dumbest man with the purest heart, citation needed. Twitter, also known as X, from 2016 to present day, screen grabs of Johnny looking confused plus me when. Captions about ghosting, dating apps, or emotional damage. Instagram, quotes over screenshots. If she doesn't want me at my Johnny Bravo, she doesn't deserve me at my Kronk. TikTok, voiceovers using Bravo audio, thirst trap satire, POVs featuring Bravo pickup lines with cringe text overlays. Each format gave Johnny a new life. Because he doesn't need context. He is the context. Here's the secret to Johnny's meme ability. He always loses, but he never breaks. That makes him endlessly relatable, emotionally elastic, and safe to use as a self-dunk. People love a meme that says, I'm a mess, but at least I look good in sunglasses. Johnny doesn't make you feel bad for relating to him. He makes you feel like you're not alone in your cringiest moments. He turns rejection into a mood board. He makes romantic failure fashionable. And that's the kind of loser meme culture likes best. Alongside SpongeBob, Squidward, Bugs Bunny, and Homer Simpson, Johnny Bravo has joined the elite class of endlessly recyclable cartoon faces. His biggest hits: me trying to flirt versus her reaction split panels. When you think you're the main character, bud. How men looked at you after lifting one weight in 2002. Johnny Bravo energy equals shorthand for clueless, confident chaos. He's not the most used meme, but he's one of the most versatile. And in meme culture, versatility equals longevity. This is the big twist. Johnny Bravo memes aren't just nostalgic. They're foundational. He's not referenced as remember this guy. He's used as a shorthand for emotions we still feel. Unwanted confidence, misread social cues, bad flirting, unnecessary swagger, overhyping a bad idea. Johnny isn't an antique. He's functioning meme machinery. People still discover him without knowing the show, because the face says it all. Johnny Bravo's legacy isn't in ratings. It's not in toys or sequels or cinematic universes. It's in screenshots, in GIFs, in TikToks with 8 million likes that use his voice without a single credit. He became a reaction template for modern life. Overconfident, underprepared. Loud, but soft inside. Failing, but somehow iconic anyway. And that makes him immortal. Not because he evolved, but because the internet did. And somehow, Johnny was already there, striking a pose for the timeline. Let's cut the flex and say it outright. Johnny Bravo is cringe. Cringe in his confidence. Cringe in his social skills. Cringe in his inability to read a room or a single human facial expression. He walks into every interaction at a 10. He leaves it at a 0. And somehow, he's okay with that. And that's the secret. That's the real power of Johnny Bravo. Because while other cartoon characters taught us how to grow, evolve, and become better people, Johnny Bravo taught us how to be cringe and be free. Johnny never apologizes for being himself. Tries to become someone else. Lets failure stop him from showing up again. Embarrasses you for laughing at him. He lives in a state of eternal confidence, eternal rejection, eternal bounce back. It's delusional, it's repetitive, and it's weirdly inspiring. Because the truth is, most of us live in fear of being perceived like Johnny. Too loud, too eager, too obvious in our intentions. And Johnny says, "Good, now make it louder." Everyone's been in a Johnny Bravo moment. Sent the risky text. Wore the outfit that was a little too much. Tried to flirt and bomb hard. Took a confident selfie and immediately regretted it. Told a joke that nobody laughed at. Those moments live in our heads as cautionary tales. But Johnny, he lives in that space. All the time. And instead of curling into a ball of shame, he strikes another pose. That's not just comedy. That's a coping mechanism turned into cartoon art. In recent years, the internet embraced a new idea. Let people enjoy things. Be cringe, but free. Irony is out, earnestness is in. And who better represents that than Johnny? He's unfiltered, unembarrassed, unchanged by the judgment of others. Even when he's rejected, mocked, or tossed out of a building, he walks away like, "I still got it." And somehow, that makes him bulletproof. What Johnny Bravo teaches us, whether he means to or not, is that being cringe takes guts. It takes guts to try when failure is certain. It takes guts to flirt badly and still believe in your next line. It takes guts to put yourself out there when everyone's rolling their eyes. In a world obsessed with image, control, and playing it cool, Johnny is pure, unfiltered effort. And while we don't want to be him, sometimes, we wish we had that kind of shameless energy. Johnny's not chasing clout. He's not curating his brand. He's not gaming the algorithm. He's just out here, living, flexing, failing, repeat. He's proof that you don't need to win to be iconic. You don't need to be liked to be lovable. And you don't need to stop being cringe to keep being yourself. In his own absurd way, Johnny Bravo is a low-stakes role model for self-expression. Unpolished, unfiltered, unbothered. On social media, we see carefully edited thirst traps, perfect selfies with 6 failed drafts, people trying not to look like they're trying. Johnny Bravo is the opposite. He's the first draft selfie, voice note sent without review, confidence you wish you had when you posted that story at 2 a.m. He's the blueprint for, "This might flop, but I'm hitting send anyway." And that's more honest than most of what we post. Johnny Bravo fails spectacularly, but he also doesn't fear rejection, doesn't internalize loss, doesn't take failure as a sign to quit. In a world that tells us to minimize risk, avoid vulnerability, be effortlessly cool, Johnny says, trip, fall, and do it again with style. He fails with commitment, and weirdly, that makes him braver than most of us. We'll never be Johnny Bravo. We shouldn't be. But we can take pieces of his mindset. Show up loud. Be sincere, even when it's weird. Laugh when it doesn't land. Flex, fail, and flex again. Be cringe. and still think we look great in sunglasses. Because the truth is, cool is a moving target, cringes forever, ain't confidence that survives failure. That's iconic. So yeah, Johnny Bravo might have been rejected by the world, but he never rejected himself. And maybe that's the bravest thing you can do. There was no finale, no goodbye episode, no emotional wrap-up, no final arc where Johnny found love, grew up, or learned how to knock before entering a room. Johnny Bravo just faded out. One day he was everywhere, flexing between ad breaks, striking poses in CN bumpers, yelling "Well mama," like it meant something profound. Then, quietly, without ceremony, he was gone. No reboot, no spin-off, no revival tour, just reruns, just memory, just nostalgia taped up in the attic like an old cartoon lunchbox. And you know what? That's okay, because some characters aren't meant to evolve. They're meant to echo. Johnny Bravo's last new content aired in 2004. It wasn't even a finale, just more episodes. Same format, same Johnny. Cartoon Network was shifting. The 90s surreal slapstick Wade was giving way to smarter, serialized shows like Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Ben 10, Teen Titans, Adventure Time. A few years later, animation was evolving. Characters were growing. Cartoons were being asked to mean something. Johnny Bravo, he was still trying to flirt with a librarian using a pickup line from 1997. He wasn't canceled. He was just out of step. And rather than force him to change, Cartoon Network let him rest. Could Johnny have grown up? Sure. On paper, there were whispers from fans about a reboot where Johnny realizes he's stuck in a loop. A spin-off where Buddy sends him to therapy. An arc where he finally dates someone who teaches him humility. But here's the thing. Johnny Bravo isn't built to learn. He's built to be rejected, flex anyway, and stay exactly the same. Trying to evolve him would have broken him. It would have made him self-aware, and Johnny is many things, but self-aware is not one of them. He lives in denial. He thrives in loops. He is the loop. And to remove that is to remove Johnny. So the only real ending for him was no ending at all. The early 2000s brought a new wave of animation. Suddenly, cartoons had lore, continuity, emotional arcs, multi-season plots, theme songs that made you cry. The audience had grown up, and CN was growing with them. Shows like Samurai Jack, Teen Titans, and eventually Adventure Time marked a shift toward introspective animation. Even comedies were changing. Foster's Home had emotional episodes. Chowder was meta and philosophical. Regular Show tackled friendship, regret, and workplace dread. There was less room for the pure slapstick of Johnny Bravo. Not because it wasn't funny, but because it no longer fit the mood. It was like bringing a kazoo to a jazz recital. So Johnny wasn't pushed out. He was simply left behind. Johnny's style was never timeless. It was aggressively of its time. Elvis impressions, karate moves, mirror pep talks, hair so high it blocks signals. That's part of why we loved him. But it's also why he didn't age forward with the rest of animation. And that's not a flaw. It's a function. Some characters are made to travel through time. Others are made to hold it in place. Johnny Bravo became a time capsule of pre-social media confidence, cartoon masculinity before deconstruction, comedy before meta-awareness took over. He doesn't belong in the 2020s. He belongs to Saturday mornings, to CRT televisions, to the pause between flipping channels. That's why his absence doesn't feel like loss. It feels like memory. You know how some shows beg for closure? They dangle unresolved arcs. They build toward emotional payoffs. They cry out for one last episode. Johnny never asked for that, because Johnny never changed. There was no arc to wrap, no cliffhanger to resolve. He ended exactly the way he lived. Mid-flex, mid-rejection, mid-sentence. And somehow, that feels right. A finale would have made it sentimental. But Johnny was never sentimental. He was a cartoon that showed up, did his thing, got wrecked, and came back tomorrow like it never happened. And in the end, that is his send-off. No evolution. No redemption. Just another pratfall in a pose. Johnny's quiet fade-out puts him in rare company. Think Calvin and Hobbes. Ed and Eddie. Samurai Jack, pre-revival. Shows that ended not with a bang, but with a soft stop. And there's something powerful about that. Because in a culture obsessed with closure, Johnny Bravo reminds us, not everything needs a finale. Sometimes it's enough to make people laugh, stick in their memory, and vanish like a favorite toy you didn't realize was gone until years later. Johnny didn't get a goodbye, but he didn't need one, because you never really forget him. Johnny Bravo didn't evolve, didn't say goodbye, didn't cry in the rain or write a farewell letter in crayon. He just stopped appearing, and in doing so, became bigger than the show itself. He became a meme, a metaphor, a mascot for a type of energy the world rarely rewards, but secretly admires. And maybe that's the perfect way for Johnny Bravo to go out. Not with a moral, not with a redemption arc, but with a final, eternal flex, stuck in a cartoon loop where rejection is routine, hair gel is infinite, and ego is bulletproof. The lights dim, the tape rewinds, the flex remains, because even when the show ended, Johnny Bravo never stopped being Johnny Bravo. He left quietly, no ceremony, no final bow, just an empty space where the swagger used to be. But the wild thing about Johnny Bravo, he didn't stay gone. He got absorbed into the DNA of animation itself, subtly, invisibly, and in pieces. Because Johnny Bravo wasn't just a character. He was a blueprint, a code that scattered across shows, genres, and generations. And if you know where to look, you'll see him everywhere. Let's get one thing straight. Johnny Bravo wasn't the first cartoon himbo, wasn't the first overconfident fool, wasn't even the first to mix muscle with comedy. But what he was loud enough to leave a trace. He was the last of the golden age archetypes, the middle child of slapstick and self-parody, a bridge between Saturday morning cartoons and self-aware animation. And as the medium matured, Johnny's energy didn't vanish. It evolved. Johnny's most obvious legacy is in every cartoon man who's buff, beautiful, dumb as bricks, and thinks he's nailing it. You've seen his descendants in Crom from The Emperor's New Groove, less creepy, more domestic. Maui from Moana, flashier, sings better, but still full of himself. Captain Quark from Ratchet and Clank, a Bravo clone in sci-fi armor. Zap Brannigan from Futurama, more sleazy, less biceps. Sterling Archer from Archer, Johnny on a cocktail of ego and existential dread. BoJack Horseman in his early seasons, a deeper, darker, washed-up Bravo with depression. These characters all share Johnny's DNA. Self-centeredness, delusional charisma, failure masked as swagger. And like Johnny, they all crash. A lot. But that crash, that's the comedy. We've already traced Johnny's connection to Kronk in the modern himbo era in earlier chapters. But the bigger picture, Johnny helped normalize soft masculinity in a muscle suit. Because once audiences saw a guy like Johnny fail often, cry sometimes, flex always, and still be funny, it opened the door for male characters too. Be vulnerable, be dumb in endearing ways, be attractive without being threatening. It gave us Fix-It Felix Jr. from Wreck-It Ralph, Bolin from Legend of Korra, Klaus Heisler from American Dad and his human foremarks, King Shark from Harley Quinn, Reagan's Himbo X from Inside Job. They're not all carbon copies, but they live in the Bravo zone. Built like a tank, soul of a golden retriever, brain of a grape, and we love them for it. Johnny didn't just fail, he failed rhythmically. There's a pattern to his stories. See girl, speak line, receive slap, float away with cartoon birds, wake up and try again. That rejection loop became a comic tool in other shows. SpongeBob, repeating failures in enthusiastic ways. Ed and Eddie, never winning, but always scheming. Regular show, romantic missteps played as weekly gags. Rick and Morty, with Morty ironically becoming the new Johnny at times. BoJack Horseman, but played as tragedy instead of comedy. Johnny taught creators how to make failure charming, and that kind of character became a fixture in modern animation. Always messing up, always returning, never quite learning, but never giving up either. That resilience equals audience comfort. Before we had TikTok Alpha Brothers or Grindset Meme Lords, Johnny Bravo was the original flexer. He's the guy who works out constantly, looks in mirrors more than anyone else, peacocks without shame, has zero follow-through, and while he wasn't trying to be social commentary, he accidentally became one. Now, cartoons regularly satirize influencer confidence, gym bro culture, coolest male ego, and every time they do, you can trace it back to a man in sunglasses yelling "Well mama" into a void that does not care. Shows like Big Mouth, BoJack, Inside Job, Solar Opposites, Smiling Friends are all riding the Bravo wave. Ego is entertainment. This one's subtle but powerful. Johnny Bravo's entire structure became template comedy. Set up overconfident reaction, cartoonish consequence reset. That loop now shows up everywhere. Online sketch comedy, TikTok joke formats, YouTube animation shorts, Instagram reels with Bravo-style music cues. Even in Netflix animated shows such as Farzar, Hoops, etc., his comedic rhythm, fast setup, bold mistake, visual punchline, influenced animation timing. He helped bridge classic Looney Tunes pacing to modern meme and gag quick cuts. He's part of the format now, even if no one says his name. Here is the kicker. Johnny Bravo not getting a reboot may have made his influence stronger. Without updates, rebrands, or gritty revivals, he stayed iconic, untouched, a fixed point in cartoon time. This created space for other shows to take his formula and reshape it. With more heart from Kronk, with more darkness from BoJack, with more depth from Archer, with more weirdness from Smiling Friends, with more softness from Steven Universe's himbo-adjacent fusion characters. Johnny's lack of evolution freed other shows to explore what he couldn't, and that absence became an open lane in the animation highway. Johnny Bravo didn't need a statue. He got something better. Legacy through laughter. His structure became foundational. His archetype became lovable. His failure became formative. And even though he vanished from new episodes, he never left animation, because every time a cartoon man flexes, fails, and comes back for more, that's Johnny Bravo, still echoing, still loud, still getting rejected in spirit with sunglasses on. There's a moment in every great story when the camera pulls back, the credits start to roll, the music swells. The main character doesn't say a word because they don't have to. That's where we are now. Johnny Bravo's not on TV anymore. Not in new episodes. Not in press releases or reboot announcements or expanded universes. But somehow, he's never felt more alive. Because Johnny's not just a cartoon. He's an idea. A vibe. A flex that never really stopped. Johnny Bravo wasn't cool. He just thought he was. He wasn't smart. But he was sure of himself. He wasn't strong where it counted. But he tried anyway. And that's what made him unforgettable. Because in a world full of polished characters and perfect arcs, Johnny stood tall as a beacon of loud failure, chaotic confidence, absolute unwavering self-belief, and cartoon resilience that couldn't be taught, only drawn. He didn't evolve. He didn't grow. He didn't get the girl. But he showed up. Every single time. And that's legacy. Most animated icons have arcs. Batman broods and overcomes. BoJack spirals and seeks redemption. SpongeBob. Well, Sponge stays Sponge, but with nuance. Johnny had no such journey. Because Johnny was the loop. His lack of arc was the point. It told us, you don't have to grow to be worth remembering. You don't need to succeed to be iconic. You can mess up, flop, embarrass yourself, and still be loved. That's a strange kind of comfort, a cartoon catharsis, and we felt it, even if we didn't know how to say it. Johnny Bravo wasn't aspirational. He wasn't even functional. But he was free. Free to be awkward, be bold, be wrong, be ridiculous. And while we laughed at him, we also felt something real. Because deep down, we've all had Johnny moments. Saying too much, trying too hard, thinking we were smoother than we were, believing we had a shot even when the world said not a chance. And seeing someone keep going after that, it's more than funny. It's healing. Johnny didn't leave behind lessons. He left behind vibes. The kind that show up in reaction memes, cosplays, YouTube clips, ironic dating advice, gym bro TikToks, retro edits set to synthwave music. He's a reference, a rhythm, a flavor of comedy that makes everything feel just a little more cartoonishly possible. Because if Johnny can face 100 rejections in 11 minutes and still think he's the star, so can we. A lot of cartoon men were tough. Johnny wasn't. He pretended to be. He acted like it. But really, he was soft. Cries easily. Lives with his mom. Talks to himself. No real friends except Carl and Bunny. Gets knocked out by girls half his size, emotionally and physically. And yet, he never turned bitter, never got angry, never blamed anyone else. He just tried again, not because he learned, but because he couldn't imagine not trying. And there's something beautiful about that kind of cartoon stubbornness. We don't miss Johnny because we want more episodes. We miss him because he reminds us who we used to be. When confidence came easy, when failure wasn't shameful, when we didn't second guess every move. When it was okay to not get the joke as long as you were having fun trying. Johnny Bravo was a time capsule for simpler storytelling, looser animation, honest comedy, and the idea that you could be a mess and still matter. No reboot could capture that, because he's not a story that needs finishing. He's a feeling that just keeps playing on a loop. So here's to him, to the guy who flexed before thinking, flirted before listening, failed before learning, and still got up smiling. Here's to the cartoon who wasn't wise, wasn't cool, wasn't deep, but somehow still made us feel seen. He didn't get the girl, he didn't get the closure, he didn't get the growth arc, but he got something better. He got remembered, and in the world of animation, that's the real flex. Thanks for riding along. For 3 hours, we explored the myth, the meme, and the mess of Johnny Bravo, a cartoon icon who never changed, never won, and never gave up. He wasn't perfect, he wasn't deep, but he was unforgettable. And maybe that's all a character needs to become a legend. This has been Lore FM, where we don't just tell stories, we rewind them, until they flex one last time.